think we're good. What's up, man? Thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it, bro.
No problem.
Um, Hold on. Okay, we're going. Mr. Kyle is Mamounis, is that Greek?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're basically Russian. You're one of those.
I did 23andMe, and because I had been told I had Ukrainian, and when I first got my results back and did the ancestry, it had like no Eastern European. And then,
Wow.
but they're always changing.
Yeah.
Like after you do it, you get, like if you log on a month later, your percentages, like I've had things double.
Wow.
And then now it's saying something around less than 10% Eastern European, but something.
Mine's complete opposite. I did my 23. It was literally 99.8, I think, Eastern European. It was like just that little tiny area, like Russia and Ukraine and Bulgaria. And so I was like, wow, that's a fucking shocker. Cool, man. Yeah, I saw your suka blять shirt. You know that little Instagram post you have?
Yeah.
So you know
Yeah.
what it means, then, huh?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, I'm a gamer, so.
Oh, is it a gaming thing? I didn't even know that. I'm not at all.
Yeah, like on computer games like Counter-Strike, maybe like 5 years ago, saying bad things to each other in like Russian or whatever was popular.
How funny is it that they chose Russian, huh? Well, it's good for us, man.
Well, I think a lot of Russians were playing it, and then they'd get mad and they'd say that, and then it became a thing that Americans and Europeans and stuff that didn't even know Russian would just say.
Yeah. So funny. Suka blять. That's the one. Okay, man. Cool. That's the one they chose. Yeah, man. So you have a PhD, right, in Nutritional Sciences, yeah?
Yeah, from Rutgers
Cool, man.
University in New Jersey.
Okay. Yeah. Just just kind of want to get like a background, I guess, of, what led you into that road of studying those sort of things. Like for me, it was like basically moving to the States and immediately getting fat and just kind of trying to literally like within months just getting fat. And it was just like, what is going on here? Because it was just so different. I mean, maybe stress had something to do with it too, of course, but but the diet was like so completely different. And it's, took many years to kind of figure out like, what is this, how, because we were eating like, the way we were eating was totally, different than what like a standard American diet people eat. And some, just interested how you got into that sort of thing yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but I guess I've always been interested in things like ideas. Like I'll get a thing that I'm interested in for a couple of years. And when I first went to college, I met a bunch of people that were vegetarians. Mm-hmm. And I just absorbed they were handing out pamphlets and stuff, and I just absorbed that information and became really interested in it and kind of obsessed with it, and followed that into like veganism and then raw veganism. And then at some point I decided I wanted to do nutritional research. So I switched my major to biology and did that, and then went and did. But meanwhile, while all that was happening, I was still changing my diet. So at some point I got really influenced by, do you know who Agenus Vonderplanitz is?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Rest in peace. Yeah.
Peace be upon him.
Yeah.
And so I started integrating raw animal foods, eggs and dairy at first, and then meat. And then I started becoming influenced by the paleo and low carb world. And so for a while I was eating mostly raw meat.
Yeah.
And this whole transition is happening while I'm going through the academic process of getting a bachelor's degree in biology and then getting a PhD in nutritional science. And then a year or two into the PhD thing, like I was hardcore. Like I would bring glass containers of chopped up raw meat to class or to like my lab.
I've done carnivore, but I never quite went the full raw thing. I just was just like, fuck. I mean, I've eaten, like I like what do you call raw meat when it's minced or whatever, like ground beef. Tartare. Yeah. I love that stuff, but oh man, like chicken and stuff like that. I was just like, ugh.
Yeah, I ate some raw chicken, but it was mostly beef.
Oh, okay.
And people would always ask me. In fact, it gets really old when you eat weird stuff.
Oh
Like
yeah.
people ask you all the time. Like for a while, like 6 months, it's cool because you get to feel interesting, and then you're just like,
It's like you're a CrossFitter for a while there, right? You're like,
yeah,
yeah, I do
yeah,
CrossFit. That's right, bro.
exactly. And then I think I'm still a moderator. Like I still have moderator privileges on the website rawpaleoforum.com.
I think I've been there once or twice. I can't quite remember. It's
Yeah,
been so long. Yeah.
I was really a heavy user on there. And then around late 2011 and early 2012 is when I started my PhD program, and I saw a few people post about Ray Peat and Danny Roddy,
Hmm.
who was like writing about Ray Peat. And at the time, I think Danny Roddy was doing this like eat everything diet where he was just kind of a Matt Stone. Do you know Matt Stone?
Yeah. I read some of his books. I never really, met the guy or anything, but yeah.
Yeah. So 5 or 6 years ago, or even, I don't know, 8 years ago, he was big on promoting just eat a lot of food
Okay.
for
Yeah.
your
Just get your
metabolism. It's
metabolism
just,
going. Yeah, I think I
yeah,
had one of
just
his like
eat.
hypoglycemia books. It was sort of that. It was just like just wake up. I think it was like wake up and eat pizza buttercup. You're gonna be fine. Just like he was just pushing. Like that's his kind of
Yeah.
wording. I remember. Yeah.
So I was intrigued, and I was like, I don't what's the deal with this? And then I was like kind of religiously into the low carb. Like I believed that carbs had something intrinsically wrong with them.
Hmm.
And that was being attacked on two sides. So I'm starting my PhD program, and for the first 2 years, you're taking classes, and then you usually do research for like a few months at a few different labs, and then decide which lab you're going to stay in and what your project is going to be. So I'm in classes like these basic biochemistry classes and molecular biology and all kinds of things, and I'm learning about metabolism, and that's starting to like challenge the idea that carbs are bad on one hand.
Hmm.
And then I just sort of had to read more stuff about Danny Roddy and Ray Peat, and then I started reading Ray Peat's actual website. So on the other hand, there's this like fringe information that's challenging it, and then like extremely mainstream information that I'm getting in my classes. And I'm sitting there like eating a glass container of like meat and like raw fat, and that's my meal. So like something had to change.
You were going through a religious experience there, man. That's heavy.
Yeah, I went through a conversion experience.
Yeah.
And so so I found an advisor, and pretty interested in. I was able to do something on fatty acids in an endocrinology lab,
Hmm.
and added carbs back into my diet, and then started sort of this like side project of doing a little bit of blogging and
Okay.
things like
And
that
so, like,
about nutrition.
before you get like, so before you, it's funny because your path sort of very similar to mine. Like, I was in college and I also went vegetarian first, and I mean, just eating eggs and like a little bit of like dairy stuff. Um, Doing that maybe for like almost a year, and as I got deeper into it, I went more vegan, more towards the vegan route. And then I remember, and then I remember being with a girl, and I was just like, I was just not interested in girls in that point, and that got me thinking about like, like I mean, like my dick took a vacation. You know what I mean? It was just like, it was just like adios, amiga. And so that got me thinking, and that's how I kind of worked my way back into like eating meat and stuff like that. And so, so when you were, vegetarian and vegan, I mean, what were the things that like, were positive? What did you notice? I mean, was there something, or it was more like a philosophical kind of thing that you were into, was like not harming animals, or was it, benefits of the specific diet that kept you going on it?
It was mostly the idea that eventually, when you finish detoxing and like,
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
yeah, all of the processes and stuff, that eventually you'll become this ascended super person.
Yeah.
So I never achieved that state. Mostly, I didn't really have big health problems though. The only problem I really had was because I was in my early 20s for the most part.
Uh-huh.
I just lost like all all the muscle that I had gained. So I started lifting weights in the second half of high school, and then the first year or two of college, and then the second year or two is when I was doing extreme vegan and then raw vegan.
Similar
and
experience.
I just lost so much weight. I couldn't gain weight, and I didn't even know, like, I thought I knew everything about nutrition, that if you just eat these vegan foods you'd be good. I didn't even know like how much protein you're supposed to eat, or even calories, I mean, I knew like 2,000 calorie diet, like from a container.
Yeah, it's a similar experience. Yeah, I lost a bunch of weight. Just the gym was just like not interesting, and like I said, just not interested. And then I remember eating, I went out to a diner like here in LA and just got like a steak, and literally waking up the next day and it was just like a tent under the bed. Literally, like, it was true story. I just woke up and then that's what, like, for me, that was my light bulb moment where I was like, okay, maybe I should eat some meat more often. Okay, so it was more that you were just so, I guess was interested in it. And then when you were doing, when you shifted over to eating more meats, I mean, was it that you gained muscle, that you got shredded? I mean, that's the typical stories that you always hear from people. I mean,
yeah, like so right now I'm like 180. And when I was at my lightest, I was like below 140. So I was like really skinny. And then when I added like a little bit of like raw cheese and stuff like that, and I got to like I gained a few pounds, and then I started eating meat, and then I just immediately jumped up to like 155. So it's like as I added things back, my body just immediately sort of ratcheted up to a new equilibrium.
Yeah.
And the whole time I was trying to exercise, I actually had decent energy levels. I just couldn't gain muscle. It was
more
just
muscle.
like, it was as if like, before, like when you're like a young kid, and you know how like kids, they're growing, but they can't really put on like mature muscle. Like they don't have the same hormones, It was almost like I had lost like mature male ability to build muscle, but I had high energy.
Initially, when you switched over from being vegan or vegetarian vegan, then paleo, so you did gain some muscle, you did put on some weight. So I mean, it wasn't never like a quest for you to, be the shreddest guy in the room or whatever. It was just you were experimenting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wanted to, look better and get more muscle and stuff. Like at that time, I think I had been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu by then. So, I wanted like my performance and stuff to be better, but I was never really overweight. So it was never like that. And the only time I was really skinny and had trouble was when I was vegan.
And so, like, was it what was your structure when you were eating, mostly raw meat? Was it like the one meal a day kind of thing, or a couple meals a day, or you were eating regularly?
Two
meals a day. No, okay, so it's sort of like the Sean, who Sean Baker is, the current guy that's talking about all the carnivore stuff.
I think so, but I don't really keep up with that stuff anymore.
Well, yeah, it's just in the world. Okay, and so, and just now to get a little deeper on it, I mean, what's happening with the body that when you're going from, mostly using glucose as your fuel to, fat and protein, and obviously going into ketosis?
Yeah, so it's mostly the hormonal change where you switch over from sort of like a cyclical insulin when after a meal where your glucose goes up to, having cortisol and doing a lot of gluconeogenesis, and the liver is working a lot.
So that's like a big point. So like when people, when you are doing that switch over, your cortisol does go up, right? I mean, is there a doubt about it? Or, I mean, for sure, if you're going, full carnivore, no glucose, no sugars, nothing, you are raising up your cortisol, right?
Yeah. That's the main hormone that is necessary for gluconeogenesis. But I guess some people do notice that their cortisol goes down a little bit after they do those diets for a while. But then people also complain about adrenal fatigue and adrenal insufficiency. So whether it's a good thing that their cortisol starts to go down a little bit, or that's kind of a question. It might just be that there's only so much that it can do,
Because that's the debate. It's like, if people notice so many benefits, when they and I've been there too. Like when I initially started doing sort of low carb, my way was more to sort of after just experimenting my own. Then I found out who Paul Chek is. Have you heard of Paul Chek?
Yeah.
And he kind of tells everybody to kind of do their metabolic typing kind of thing, if you ever heard of that, and so it's like selecting, if you're from Russia like me, or if you're Greek ancestry, what were your ancestors eating, and and if it's Russian, obviously there wasn't a lot of vegetables, not too much sugar, blah blah blah. So I was mostly low carb, and initially I did notice that it was like and whatever you want to call it, inflammation, because all these terms are so it's arbitrary really, in a way, that you do feel like a better, you feel a little bit of euphoria, and I felt pretty good for a couple of years. I mean, maybe more so. I mean, I was just same thing. I got it in my head that it was like carbs are bad. I probably shouldn't be eating that many of them because I'm not from Hawaii. That's like Paul Chek's ultimate thing, by the way. Yeah, he always says like, if you're from Hawaii, you should be eating pineapples, you'll be fine. But if you're from Alaska, you should be eating whale blubber, blah, blah, blah. And it makes sense on some philosophical level, right? Like, I mean, at least initially it does. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt okay on that kind of a diet too. I think my ancestry is probably relatively hunter-gatherer, because even though my last name's Greek, that's like a really small percentage of my background. It's just sort of the male line, the name that I ended up with. But I'm like a third British, and like the rest is like Germanic, and so mostly Northwestern European, and then a little bit of Southern and Eastern. So anyway. The only problem I really had with the paleo thing is when I would exercise really hard, like at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something. Sometimes I would do, say, 2 classes in a row, so work out for like a little over 2 hours pretty intensely. I'd give myself a migraine.
Yeah.
Like, I'd come home and I'd eat my my high-fat, low-carb meal, and I try to like eat as fast as possible and like replenish what I had used, but it was like too late. Like my liver was just. So
you were hardcore. You didn't have any like cheat days where you just went out like me, where I would fucking once a week I'd go get some Ben and Jerry's and just go to town on it for two pints of those.
I would cheat socially, not really so much on my own. Or sometimes I would go out to a restaurant, like say a Thai food restaurant, and get an entree. And then maybe throw out the rice and just sort of take the, like whatever it was, like chicken or beef or whatever, with the sauce, and like mix that into my normal raw meat stuff to give it, to like make it seem like I'm eating real people food.
Yeah. So do you think that when people are initially doing these sort of diets, like carnivore or low carb, I mean, is it possible that what you're really feeling is just that initial kind of euphoria from cortisol raising and from probably getting rid of all the other bullshit that you're eating? I mean, you think it's like a fair hypothesis?
Yeah, and also most people are probably not getting enough fat-soluble vitamins and maybe enough protein. So all of a sudden you're getting like tons of protein, like tons of pretty high-quality protein, and a lot of fat-soluble vitamins. So yeah, and then you're also cutting out, you might have been having a reaction to something in the standard American diet, and now that's cut out. So yeah, that's probably the source of a lot of those things. It's the same thing with vegetarian. Like some people feel good because they're eating just sort of a normal crappy diet, maybe even like fast food or something, and then they start eating a bunch of vegetables and just homemade food.
Yeah.
And buying real food and eating it, and they'll feel good for a while because they're getting a bunch of vitamins or whatever. And it takes longer for the deficiencies to set in,
Yeah. Are you still? So you're saying you're still on the forum with all the raw guys? Do you know anybody who's still doing the diet like 10, 20 years in? Is there anybody still around? I mean, is like, Agenis passed away, obviously. What's the guy, Washington? I can't remember his first name. Do you know what I'm talking about? There was a guy that was quite popular. I can't remember his first name, but
yeah, Charles.
Charles, I think, yeah, that's right, Charles Washington.
I don't know. I'm not on the forum anymore. I just know that I still have an active account there because, like, once in a blue moon, I'll get an email about like moderator activity, like twice a year. But I don't go on the forum. I knew one guy who did it for a really long time, and as far as I know, anybody that's done a disciplined, very low carb diet, whether it's raw meat or cooked or whatever, for 10 years or more, their blood glucose, like fasting, blood glucose starts to creep up.
So that's funny. Recently I started training for a marathon that I ran. And at that point I was still low carb, or kind of avoiding the carbohydrate stuff. I would refuel here and there with like, whatever healthy quote unquote carbs. And I got my blood glucose tested, and it wasn't crazy, but it was, 116, 120, somewhere there, which is high. And then within a few weeks, I started eating more carbs and less fat, but still, having protein pretty high. And it went down to 96, even though, I switched it the other way.
Right.
So that was for me the kind of another point where it was like, maybe carbohydrates aren't so evil. I mean, what would be the selling point for, people to include carbohydrate in their diet? I mean, why do you think it's important? It's a big question, I know.
Yeah, I've thought about this for a long time. Because I don't want to just like dismiss all of the arguments of low carb people about like, well, we went through the ice age and there's, times when maybe carbs weren't available. I think that's dubious at this point. Data where people look at the Inuit and how their metabolism works, and modern hunter-gatherers and how they go to great lengths to get stuff like honey and just like any carbohydrate source they can get to.
And have you looked at the Inuit stuff, at the studies? How valid are they? And are they, have you read any of those studies in depth?
Yeah, actually I did, because I was asked to review a paper like 2 or 3 years ago by Amber O'Hearn. She's I don't know how popular she is because, like I said, I don't really follow that world, but she's an online person about the carnivore diet.
Okay.
And I had published a paper with the Journal of Evolutionary Health, whatever it was called, the journal that was associated with the Ancestral Health Symposium, which is like, I don't know if it's still going on, but I gave a couple talks there, and they asked me to make one of the talks into a paper. So after that, they asked me to review a paper, and it was about Inuit studies, and Amber was trying to say, I forget what she was trying to say, but it was interesting because the data was kind of inconvenient, because basically the thing I took from it that was really interesting is that Inuit were more resistant to ketosis than like average non-Inuit American people. So in order to have measurable ketones in their urine, for example, they would have to fast for longer than people that are eating a regular diet that includes carbohydrate.
So that would mean that when they're not so they're doing more gluconeogenesis basically before they're getting into ketosis, right?
Correct.
Because so that meaning they're supplying themselves with glucose before they go in full ketone mode. Which, does that even ever happen? Do you go ever full ketone mode? No,
you never really go full anything.
Right, right. Yeah, well, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. But it was just funny because everybody, I guess, the people that did those studies, this was back in like the 20th century, even the 1970s was some of them, and there were some more recent. They were just people that wanted to do metabolic studies on different populations, and the Inuit are, a population that is kept apart, kept itself apart. So it's like genetically a specific gene pool, and it's been following a specific lifestyle that's very different than other people for a long time. So it's interesting. But then the low carb and keto people wanted to mine this data to show, like, look, there's this group and they've lived on, a mostly carnivore diet for a really long time, like centuries. And they wanted to show, like, yeah, these people must be really keto adapted, and it shows that we could all be keto adapted. But they weren't even in ketosis. Like the Inuit that were eating, mostly whatever kind of meats they're eating.
And blubber. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they had a couple of genetic variants that did exactly what you said, which is ramp up their ability to do gluconeogenesis, and did not ramp up their ability to do ketosis. So they were actually genetically adapted under a low carb diet to make more carbs, not to run better on ketones or fatty acids.
But as far as like
yeah.
Yeah, right. So, but as far as like, there's no studies of taking that group and giving them carbohydrates and seeing what happens to them metabolically, right? They've only, or are there?
I don't know about that group. There probably are, because there's like some of the famous ones that Gary Taubes talks about is the Pima Indians.
Yeah.
And they actually, I forget if they ate carbs. Obviously, they didn't eat sugar, before colonizers came. So they did really, really badly metabolically when they were given sort of like a late, 1800, like a 19th century and early 20th century processed food diet. They had really, really bad outcomes. And so low carb people like Gary Taubes point to them as an example of people that were adapted to like paleo, relatively low carb diet, and these carbs totally messed them up. But I don't think there's a similar amount of systematic data on Inuit.
And as far as them living, anywhere 90, 100 years old, I mean, that data is not there either, right? I mean, that's just what they had to live with. So they weren't eating that way necessarily, maybe because they thought it was healthier. I mean, that's just what they had available. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even them, they have practices of like trying to harvest and dry as much berries and stuff certain times of the year. So,
yeah,
I'm sure that there's like, you could find some more things that would make it so that they're not living this, the story that they're getting everything they need from eating animals, and that they have no desire at all to traditionally get sources of carbohydrates. That's probably not true.
Right. Because, I guess it always comes back to, the body is so adaptable, and it's fascinating and it's interesting to look at. But to me, I always think like, okay, I mean, is there people that are living like 150 fucking years old, because they're eating whale blubber? Like, no. So, if they're dying the same rate as people who are even eating the standard American diet, I mean, does that necessarily mean that diet is something everybody should be adapting,
Yeah, I think their big problem is stroke. I think non-thrombotic stroke. And I think it's probably from all the omega-3s they get from the high fatty fish diet.
Oh, you never hear that. Wow, I never heard about that.
Yeah, because the big thing was, they don't have atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, but they have stroke, which is like another
type. It's not bad.
Of,
it's a good trade-off. No?
Right, yeah. So it's like they're not forming lesions in their vessels. They're not making big plaques in their vessels, but they're having these kind of, embolisms and bleed outs, like, mostly in the brain. And I don't think they have a longer life expectancy than regular Americans at all, actually.
Well, it's something to think about. So you brought up like omega-3s, and at my point, not one time, I used to work with Charles Poliquin. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's like a famous strength coach. Anyway,
no.
Yeah, anyway, he's in that world of, at one point him and Paul Chek were friends. He's a very famous strength coach. And he was one guy that would recommend 60 grams of fish oil a day in order to lose fat. Yeah, and I've done it. Um, oh yeah, it wouldn't be at once. I would split it up like 10 caps official here, 10 caps official here, 10. And let me tell you, man, I was burping and farting, and it was fucking horrible. And to this day, I mean, there's lots of videos and lots of podcasts where he recommends that. If you've heard of Tim Ferriss, his pretty big podcast, he's been on it, recommending that. And me just trying it on my own. I never really went super deep into the research. It's just something that I wasn't into yet. But after trying it out, I was just not impressed, and I didn't see because you would think I'm gonna take 60. In my head it's like, okay, I'm gonna take 60 grams of fish oil. I'm just gonna get shredded, 6-pack. None of that happened. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on omega-3s? I mean, are they, a essential nutrient? So should it be something we should be getting or avoiding, or there's not really a conclusive, data either way?
Well, I don't think there's 100% conclusive data that it's totally not necessary at all. Mm-hmm. Like it being talked about being essential is really exaggerated, and it would be almost impossible to not get the tiny amounts that may be essential. Like, you would have to go out of your way to eat a low-fat diet, a pretty low-fat diet, and specifically avoid, fatty fish, and not cook with vegetable oil or maybe even olive oil to actually make yourself deficient according to what it would take. As far as I know, humans... There are, studies, and Ray Peat has written about this extensively and said that it could have been a B vitamin deficiency. Mm-hmm. But there's examples of older literature where, and this is where the title of essential fatty acids came from, is rats that were given a low-fat diet, and then they had some problems, and the problems were fixed by giving them either omega-6 or omega-3 or both.
And that's the Burr studies, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And some other people did it too, but yeah, they were the pioneers and they're the most famous. Mm-hmm. But that actually doesn't happen with humans. Mm-hmm. Like, that's really hard to do for whatever reason. Like rats, whether it is the essential fatty acids, being the low-fat diets that's giving them those symptoms, or whether it's the Ray Peat hypothesis, which is that taking out the fat ramps up their metabolism, increases their vitamin requirements, and then they're being fed the same dietary chow with the same micronutrients as before, and then they're having deficiency symptoms of some vitamin that they're getting low in. And so either way.
And so just to back it up, like essential fatty acids, I mean, that Burr study, is that where that kind of term came from? As far as I know, I think that's where it came from, right? So, I mean, is it in the Ray Peat's, his view is that there's no such thing as essential fatty acids, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, how much do you agree with that? And do you think that's valid, or do you think, well, like you said, it's pretty hard to get no fat whatsoever, right? Unless you're eating specifically just, I don't know, sugar and nothing else.
So I don't know. There's a lot of when you study fatty acid metabolism, there's a lot of enzymes that humans have and other animals that specifically act on polyunsaturated fats. Mm-hmm. And then, so that sort of suggests that we are adapted to having them in our systems, but then there is a polyunsaturated omega-9 fatty acid called mead acid, MEAD, that you will make. I think especially if you do have a very low PUFA diet, and that can also interact with those same enzymes. So there's a lot of points and counterpoints when people talk about are the so-called essential fatty acids actually essential, and I'm just agnostic on it, and my conclusion is just there's no good reason to take fish oil or cod liver oil or anything supplementary for omega-3s or omega-6s. And there's a pretty good reason to avoid eating a lot of it.
Yeah.
So,
and that was, the gentleman that I mentioned, Charles Poliquin, that was his big selling point, is that if you go to PubMed and type in any disease and type in fish oil, you'll find an article about it. And it's true. But I mean, how valid are some of those studies? I mean, have you found any have you found any good study that does, at least show some benefit, that's, more than just kind of maybe so?
Well, here's the thing. Like, if you take a group of people that are having, say, an inflammatory condition like insulin resistance or some type of obesity state or pre-diabetes or something, and you give them fish oil, there's a lot of things you can give those people that over the course of 3 months might lower their fasting glucose or some other symptom. Like, a lot of inflammatory conditions are treated with, for example, cortisol, like, joint inflammation and stuff. And there's all kinds of drugs, that can sort of sensitize the insulin system different ways and just play with those symptoms. So a fish oil definitely does something. It definitely does something to people who have certain conditions. I mean, there are people that straight up say, and a lot of them, that they had joint pain and then they took fish oil and it kind of went away.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ways to interpret that, and a lot of good, like, molecular biology reasons to think that it's suppressing maybe the immune cells that are making the inflammation rather than clearing the cause of it, and things like that.
Or maybe like with the diet thing, like we talked about, maybe it's a temporary, thing that you're experiencing, like just like when you switch over to being vegan and you feel great and your skin is awesome and your shits are great and blah blah blah, and then 6 months later you can't get your dick up, it's so true story, right? So that's kind of, I mean, yeah, so it's interesting. And just to clarify, the difference between, the saturated fat, the polyunsaturated fat, the monounsaturated fat, what else we got, trans fats. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the you mentioned PUFA, which is polyunsaturated fat. So what's the difference between that and saturated fat?
It's the amount of hydrogens on the fatty acid chain. So if something being saturated means that, so carbon forms 4 bonds. So in a fatty acid chain, there's a carbon, and if it's not the end of the chain, then there's a carbon in front of it and a carbon behind it. That's 2 bonds. And then so there's 2 more. And if it's saturated, then all the carbons in that chain, all of the open bonds that aren't bound to another carbon are bound to hydrogen. And when it's unsaturated, it's when instead of one of those hydrogens being there, it has a double bond to one of its partner carbons. And that changes all kinds of things about the shape, like it makes a kink. So the saturated fats are relatively straight, and when they're unsaturated, it like makes an angle. And if they're unsaturated again, it makes another turn. It makes their interaction with water different. It's the reason why they're liquid at cold temperatures,
Right.
Because they can't pack together as tightly because of all those kinks.
Yeah.
And the most important, well, it depends what perspective you have, but perhaps the most important thing is that the energy needed to insert an oxygen to oxidize them is much lower when there's double bonds present, because there's stable resonance structures that can be formed using those electrons, which kind of gets into nerdy organic chemistry.
But that's you're talking about the saturated fats, so you need less oxygen, you're saying, to oxidize them.
Yeah, to oxidize, not enzymatically, but like in your system, just with rogue oxygen species, the polyunsaturated fats will oxidize and saturated fats will not. So if you want to oxidize a saturated fat, you have to use a lot of heat, or your own digestive enzymes.
So so is that why kind of that story of cold water? Well, not story. I mean, it's true. The cold water fish having more polyunsaturated fat, right? Because they're in cold water, and so that keeps them from freezing up, basically. Yeah. Okay. And so, being a human being, I guess it kind of makes you think that should you be taking in a lot of these polyunsaturated fats? Is because mammalian warm body, right?
Yeah, and also humans and pretty much all mammals, when you eat carbohydrate I guess to a lesser extent protein, and make fatty acids, you make almost all saturated. You make some monounsaturated, and you make basically no polyunsaturated fats. Which to me, it's like if the body wanted to have them, you'd make some of them.
Yeah. So how is it that we got here? That I was at the store the other day and I saw Mazola corn oil, and it says heart healthy on it. How is it that we got to this point where you go to a store and everybody, thinks that the butter is bad, the coconut oil is bad, and you have guys like Michael Greger promoting stuff, that it's horrible for you, it's going to kill you, and polyunsaturated fat is what we should be eating. I mean,
yeah, that was like a really, it's crazy. It's still around,
big time, yeah.
Because it's been more or less refuted in the sort of like hardcore academic, even the mainstream. Well, it's hard to say.
Yeah, because it's like, you get a cereal box and it says American Heart Association.
Yeah.
Right? And it's...
Well, those are really lagging indicators. Like those kinds of institutions are like 20 years at least behind anything that's like new information. But yeah, I would say, there's a lot of people in the paleo world have done really good historical work on explaining, like the Burrs with the essential fatty acid research, and Ansel Keys about cholesterol, and then also saturated fat, and the process of kind of demonizing saturated fat in the middle to later 20th century in American science and then popular culture. And there was like financial interests with the like vegetable oil companies and stuff like that to make things like margarine, to replace butter. But I think it's deeper than that. I think that there's always, and when we were talking about vegetarian and veganism, there's always been, at least in many parts of the world, in many cultures, there's been a sort of implicit spirituality and even physical health suggestion around not eating meat.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, a lot of religions and different sects of Christianity even will have like days of meat abstention, and there's this idea that like it's more spiritual to just eat plants and that it's ultimately better for you. So I think there's just this kind of floating around idea, and so it didn't take that much science that was that high quality to really get that going, and then it becomes like a self-reinforcing thing where even just simple things like people can see that butter, and if they have like beef fat or whatever, is solid at room temperature, and olive oil is liquid, and then it gets kind of cloudy in the fridge, and then if you've got like corn oil, it's liquid and not cloudy at all, even in the refrigerator. And they look at that and they go, well, that's like in my arteries, and it just, like real scientists and real doctors, although actually I think Dr. Oz had somebody on like 15 years ago.
Well, he's a real doctor though, but come on.
Yeah.
He's a real doctor.
And he said that. He said like, this is what happens in your arteries. And
oh, really? I haven't seen that. Oh, man.
Yeah, it was like, people have said that. Most people don't actually say that. Because that's just really stupid, and they would get called stupid, and it would mess up their credibility. But sometimes you don't have to say things like, you say that this type of fat is bad for your arteries, and then people just kind of see that it's solid at room temperature, and they don't realize, like, you're inside your body, like after something's digested and absorbed, and it's like bound to carrier proteins and all of this stuff in your blood. That is not like washing a bunch of cooking fat down a sink drain, Right. It's not the same thing. Like the temperature is totally different. There's like, biochemical molecules
many
everywhere.
Things that are happening. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so different. It's not the same thing at all. But yeah, that's not explained to people. So there's all these underlying like kind of I guess, false common sense reasons why it would make sense, like, oh, I'm going to abstain from so much meat fat and it's good for my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets marketed because people buy that.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just, and it's funny, like, I went into, sometimes in convenience stores, there's a little, like, shelf with health food stuff.
Yeah.
Like protein bars. And it's so funny now because it's just like, how, like, if somebody watches Fox News versus MSNBC, they're just getting like a different view of reality.
Yeah.
and they can't really talk to each other about reality.
Uh-huh.
So it's like that with health because like one side of this little convenience store health stand is say like vegetarian stuff, and it'll be like, oh, nuts, like heart healthy nuts and seeds, like omega-3s and like no animal products, and then the other side will be like keto bars, and it's like just animal, like pure animal fat.
And they're in the same bucket section usually.
yeah, they're in the health. Yeah, because like if it's a little store, it doesn't have enough space to have its own section. So it's like, oh yeah, health people. So like some vegetarian has to like pick up their vegetarian bar that's like right next to like a meat bar, and like a
grass fed. Yeah.
Yeah, and the keto person has to pick up something right next to something that's like, sugar and I don't know, like a Rice Krispie bar that's vegetarian.
Yeah. So you would recommend probably. Well, that's what I'm saying. That is the crazy part to me. That you still talk to people and they still definitely believe that if saturated fat, I mean, that's obviously going to kill you, going to give you a heart attack. And what you want is that liquidy yellow shit that's in that bottle because it's good. And I mean a lot of times I just usually say like, well, I mean, just thinking about just cafes and restaurants, I mean, what's the cheapest shit they're going to use? I think of course they're going to use those cheap oils, and
right.
So I mean so do you generally avoid those oils in your diet? You try.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, go out of your way to. So okay, so to you, it's not even a question anymore that you probably shouldn't be consuming too many of those oils.
Yeah. I don't have them in the house. I use olive oil sometimes because like if I want to make a salad dressing or something, you can't really use coconut oil.
No, yeah.
It's like if you put it in the fridge, it just makes chunks of oil.
Mm.
But yeah, I cook with coconut oil or butter, and I don't really eat nuts and seeds. Not that I would religiously avoid them. Mm-hmm. Like if somebody gave me a dish, like one of those Chinese dishes or something that has some like cashews or peanuts in it, like I'd eat them. It's not a big deal. But yeah, I basically avoid stuff with polyunsaturated fats.
Yeah. So we talked about the big, fat, and now how about the sugar? Because that's the other thing that's gonna kill you.
Right.
And I had that opinion myself too, and and I mean, still thinking about it. And how did that happen? That sugar. I mean, even like you said, talking about you have the keto people, you have the vegetarian people, you have the paleo people. I mean, the one thing that most of them agree on seems to be like white sugar is the fucking devil and you will die.
True.
Right? And you're gonna get fat. I mean, that seems to be the one big one. I mean, I don't know. I think seems like all the, maybe even the breatharian, have you heard of breatharians? You heard of those people?
Yeah.
They're awesome. They're my favorite.
I read one of those books, like...
You actually read the book?
15 years ago.
Dude, you went further than me. Impressive.
Yeah, it was, I forget the author, but it was a really old book. It was from like 1950 or something. Mm-hmm. And it was this guy who was claiming that, all the breatharian people, they always say... Oh,
is it breatharian? Did I fuck it up? Is it not breatharian? I thought it was...
I think it's breatharian.
Breatharian. I'm so sorry, all breatharians out there. I apologize. I fucked that up.
Yeah, they always say they don't need to eat food, but then they always eat food and say that it's to keep themselves... Yes. It's so that they can communicate on our resonance plane. That's right.
It's every once in a while when, it's late at night, I can't sleep, I just go to YouTube and I type in one of those breatharian videos, and I just watch those because they're so awesome.
Oh, I've never done that. I'm going to have to do that tonight.
Go down the rabbit hole. Go enjoy, my friend. Enjoy. The vegan ones are awesome too, like the girl that was talking about, I mean, I remember, for me, watching vegan videos has probably been like 10 years now, when I just first started. And then I remember slowly watching one, and the girl was talking about how she lost her period. And she's like, it's toxic. I had my period. It was toxicity coming out of my body. And now I don't have my period anymore. I kid you not. And then, I feel great. And then that same girl later on, she had pictures of it. I mean, and it was true. I don't know, unless if she put on context, but the color of her eyes changed after being raw vegan. Well, that's what she claimed. I mean, I don't fucking know. I mean, I never went full raw vegan, but yeah. So back to sugar. Why is
sugar?
Yeah,
sugar's getting beat up on from all sides. So like historically, I think what happened, because I remember, I grew up mostly in the 90s. I was born in 1984. So the big thing back then was empty calories.
Mm-hmm.
So things like candy,
soda pop.
I guess, yes, soda, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are just, sugar with maybe a flavoring or something. And sometimes sugar and fat, like Reese's or something, or a chocolate bar.
Twinkie.
Yeah. So those were, the bad thing was they're empty calories. So the idea was you're getting calories, but you're not getting any vitamins and minerals, and so that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then that slowly over time, there was the Atkins thing from like the 70s, and then it sort of merged together because people were getting fatter and getting more diabetic, and sugar, mostly actually like high fructose corn syrup and processed foods, was increasing.
Yeah. Which is the empty calorie thing, which is funny because I remember being in college and watching, being in a lecture, and we were taught, sugar's bad, empty calories. You want to choose whole grain bread. And then I remember, having the textbook in front of me, because whole grain bread has all these vitamins and has this. And I remember looking at it, and it also has fortified. And I remember thinking, well, so technically flour is also empty fucking calories, but it's fortified with calories that we're, with vitamins and minerals that we're putting in there. So why would eating this be better? Couldn't I just take a multivitamin and eat some sugar?
Sugar.
That was my thought process, But because people, it's hard to think about these things. We all get so confused, But that was the thing. It's like, how can because there's really no. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's trace amounts of some B vitamins in whole grains, and even if they're whole, I mean, they're not. Those are not the same grains, when you go to Kroger or whatever, Walmart, to buy some bread. I mean, it's not the same thing.
There's something kind of easy to make that argument, because when people look at sugar and they look at like corn syrup, it just, I don't know, I guess sugar, it looks like cocaine on a certain level. And people have made that argument. Like scientists have made the argument, like neuroendocrinologists or whatever, that consuming sugar and the reward is
sugar is like cocaine, right? That's what they say.
Yeah, like the cocaine receptor system. And it's like, isn't it more likely that the cocaine uses like the food reward system?
Yes, that's exactly my thought process too. I remember thinking okay, so sugar is like cocaine, but hold on, before we had cocaine, I mean, right? It's so funny. It's the same thing that I remember thinking, yet going along with it. I don't know. It's, and so, so, the typical argument for sugar would be you eat sugar, you release a lot of insulin. So obviously when you release a lot of insulin, you get fat, and that causes insulin resistance and blah, 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 and diabetes and et cetera, et cetera. Does sugar have, how about the glycemic index? I mean, is that a valid sort of thing to look at? I mean, and compare it? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As far as I can tell, I mean, I've done my own personal experiments like sort of demonstrating that the glycemic index is real, in the sense that I taught physiology when I was a graduate student, and one of the labs that I taught was a blood sugar lab, which I was amazed. We would make the students do 4 blood glucose tests. So they would have to prick their finger with one of those metal, like the plastic spring lances, and use a strip, put a drop of blood on a strip and into a glucometer 4 times over the course of like 3 hours. And so every year when we would, all of the people who taught the class together, we would like prepare the class that week, and we would do it to ourselves just to make sure all the equipment was working right and everything. And I would take that opportunity to like eat something or not eat something and test my blood sugar, because I was able to, I could test my blood glucose like as many times as I wanted, because there's just like bottles and bottles of testing strips.
Are those little Amazon things you can buy, the glucose monitor things, are they pretty accurate, or no? Or are you talking about using something else to test it?
I don't know what brands are good, so I've never looked at like stuff you can buy like consumer, because I think like not that long ago consumers couldn't buy some of that stuff. Yeah, like it was medical only.
Yeah, I think you can now, like even if you go to like a CVS or whatever, I usually has those monitors. But then I've tested different brands, and they were like not hugely off, but like maybe 10 points or something like that off. So that's,
I can imagine that.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's like, how accurate are those things? But they are doing the continuous glucose monitors, the ones that just attach to your arm. But you do have, I think you have to, in the States at least, you have to get prescription for that. So,
yeah, so I could see like, if I ate sugar, my blood glucose would go up less than if I ate like, I forget exactly what I ate, but like if you eat something that is like say bread or something that is the carbs are pretty much all from glucose, versus something like sugar where it's 50-50 glucose and fructose, you can see it testing your own blood sugar, that the sugar, sugar, table sugar,
pure white sugar,
will make your blood glucose go up less.
Right. So actually, in fact, pure white table sugar has a less, a smaller glycemic index than does bread, which again, we're all taught to eat the whole heart healthy grains and all that stuff. Okay. Right. Yeah, that's it's so interesting. So I mean, looking over the history of sugar, because and that's the other thing, is the argument is that over time sugar consumption has gone up, and obesity has gone up, diabetes has gone up, but what else has gone up in those times?
Right. Vegetable oil.
And I mean, have you looked at those studies? Are they accurate that the sugar consumption has gone drastically up? Because from what I've heard is like maybe the last, I don't know, I've looked at some study, maybe it was the 70s and the 80s, they said it was already starting to decrease.
From what I've seen, it peaked in like right before the year 2000.
Oh, okay.
And that's counting sucrose and high fructose corn syrup and all that stuff. So in terms of, and there's different data sets, and they don't agree 100% obviously, but because there's data sets that measure like how much things are purchased and how much things are produced and things like that, and they usually correlate pretty closely. But it looks like, probably because of a lot of the stuff going around about how sugar is bad and carbs are bad, that simple sugar consumption peaked around the turn of the century and has gone down a little bit. And all that stuff like diabetes has still continued to increase. Right.
What is in one of your talks, I think you had, or maybe it was your YouTube channel that you had a percentage. What's the percentage that the vegetable oils have gone up in the last 100 years? Was it like 300% or something like that? Something crazy?
Yeah, vegetable oils, not counting soybean oil, because that number is just crazy. It was like 250. It was just over 250%. And then, so like corn, safflower, all that stuff. And then soybean oil, for whatever reason, it's just a huge cash crop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in everything. I think it's the primary component in most, if you just buy unlabeled vegetable oil, that's just not a specific type of oil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that went up like over 100,000% because it was basically not in the diet at all at the beginning of the 20th century. And now it's like 10%, I think, of the average caloric intake is, well, 10 from the omega-6 fatty acids.
Mm-hmm.
Itself, and most of that is from soybean oil or these other vegetable oils.
Okay, so maybe you should, think twice about eating those oils. And as far as comparing sugar to, the high fructose corn syrup, because that would be, the other big thing is like, well, everybody's also drinking cola and all those kind of things, which has, because usually nowadays it's cheaper, I think, right? Is that why companies put in high fructose corn syrup in there instead of just plain sugar, because it's just cheaper to make?
Yeah, I think it's cheaper for like political reasons, like tariffs on sugarcane imports and subsidies to corn. And so they're able to get the corn and do the process to make the syrup. I don't know, like who knows what would be cheaper if those things changed.
Right. Right. And have you tested specifically high fructose corn syrup compared to sugar?
No, I've actually never like consumed like pure high fructose corn syrup. I've never actually
Okay.
I've only seen it like on videos, like those videos that are like, look how bad this is, and it's
right. But I mean, you've had like a Coke
process.
And all that, even with like just
a
standard Coke, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah, I did not actually. The little like self-experimentation that I did was it was solid food.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would eat candy or like things that were just pure sugar, or I would eat candy that had fat in it, and you could see a difference there, or like a slice of bread or something like that.
So do you go out of your way to avoid high fructose corn syrup just because you're not sure about it, or I mean, is it just another form of sugar to you?
I think that sucrose is better. I think the 50-50 glucose fructose mix of sucrose, I think it's like I think that's the perfect mix. Yeah.
Right. Right, because I mean,
and it tastes better.
Yeah, it does taste better. I mean, Mexicoke all the way, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing. Like I told you, when I moved from Russia, I remember trying the drinks, and they just. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Coke still tastes good. Like, I mean, I think you're an asshole if you're just gonna say it doesn't taste good. Like, come on, with a burger and some fries, get the fuck out of here. But right. I mean, that's one thing I remember trying a Coke, and I was like, this tastes like different, And because in Russia it's the same thing, I guess. I mean, although I don't know today, I haven't had a Coke there, and I don't know. I haven't noticed, I guess. Yeah, because it was the same, just sugar. Because high fructose, I mean, what is that? Is there a number to? What's the percentage fructose it is to glucose?
Yeah, so anything that's over 50% fructose is called high fructose corn syrup. But in the industry, I think it's most efficient, and over the years, they've improved the process so like they can get an end product that's higher in fructose. So basically, the higher the fructose, they can get more sweetness units.
So you don't really know the exact number. It could be 52%. Fructose.
Yeah.
And it could be.
Yeah, and I think for different processes they use different types. So like if Coke, for example, they probably have a recipe where they're like, okay, we use this type of high fructose corn syrup with these percentages, like say 65, 35. And then but say there's like a company that makes crackers and they just add a little bit of sweetener, they might want to use 80% fructose, 20% glucose, high fructose corn syrup, because they want to use as little as possible because they're making a solid product.
Right.
So it's easy, you know what I mean?
But they're not required to label it and to tell you what percentage they're using. It's just high fructose, could be anything.
Yeah, I've never seen that labeled on any kind of.
Why would you want to? I mean, and that's the other, thing with the low carb side, which I was super into too at one point. Fructose. It was like fructose causes metabolic damage, and fructose causes this, and fructose is, just gonna turn you into a zombie and blah blah blah. And I remember for me the turning point was as you can tell, I love watching random YouTube videos. I started watching fruitarians. I don't know, you've probably seen some fruitarian videos, you know, these dudes where they're just like wake up, eat a watermelon, and by watermelon, a whole fucking watermelon, and then they go sprinting, you know, they go running for 20 miles, come back home, eat like 16 mangoes. And
yeah, I did that for a while.
You went full fruitarian. I like, yeah, I didn't quite get there to the raw thing because I just like, I was like, I need something cooked. That's funny. And yeah, for me, the one thing that I did notice is like, holy shit, this guy's eating a whole watermelon, you know, 20 mangoes, 15 pineapples or whatever. And like, that's a lot of calories and none of them are fat. I've never seen, I mean, they all are, if anything, they almost look, you know, like anorexic. They look very skinny. So what's the hate with the fructose?
That's hard to say. I think it was just that high fructose corn syrup was made to be the villain along with sugar. So it was like, you know, sugar is kind of the catch-all term that people are like, okay, sugar's bad. And then they're like, but you want to know what's really bad? And it's kind of a secret. Like, you want to know what's in all of our, you know, all the processed food, and they don't tell you is like high fructose corn syrup.
Right.
And then, because I don't think anybody talked about it in popular culture until high fructose corn syrup. So everybody, when they hear fructose, their referent for that term is high fructose corn syrup. So they don't understand like, that it's named after fruit, you know, fruit sugar. Because most people, normal people, still think fruit is healthy.
Right. Well, you know,
so if you told them fruit sugar, they go, oh, yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, and I've had that exact conversation where they were like, you know, don't eat this because it has sugar. And I was like, okay, what about fruit? Well, it has, and I was like, what kind of sugars, you know, in fruit? They're like fructose. And I was like, well, what if I mean, even me, you know, 10 years ago, if you talked to me, I didn't know that sucrose, plain white sugar was, you know, glucose and fructose. And I think people should be told that, and that maybe gets the engine rolling. Yeah. I mean, if you look at, you know, the Ray Peat. So how did you get into Ray Peat stuff? I mean, did you start drinking 2 gallons of milk kind of thing? Or was it because I know you said you got into him in college. I mean, how did you make that switch?
Well, in grad school. Now, I did it slowly. So it was like, because I was really, it was the same thing with all my transitions. Like, I really did believe in, like, the raw vegan diet or, like, an Agenus von der Planus type diet, or when I was eating mostly raw meat. I really did believe in that, and it was hard to switch. So, like, in that case, I started to have all these doubts, and I think for the longest time I kept eating, like, raw meat like I normally did, and I was just like drinking orange juice too.
So that was the initial step, that just started to drink orange juice, huh? Yeah,
and then I started making coffee. Because actually I didn't drink coffee. I was just one of those people who was like, well, coffee's not good for you. You know?
Yeah. That's interesting. You know, for a while, that's like a very old school Russian thing. It's like, don't drink coffee. But we drink a shitload of tea. Like, you know, if you're, we're like, right. Even if you go to like an Olympic training center, you know, guys will do like, you know, they'll do a set of snatch. And then in between you go to like a thermostat and they have like a cup of tea, and then they go back and just do the thing. So
that's cool.
So yeah. But coffee, I mean, now now because, you know, the big cities of Moscow, St. Petersburg, there's coffee shops everywhere, and my brother owns a coffee shop in Moscow. You know, shout out to the Bearded Dog Coffee in Moscow.
Oh, nice.
It's becoming it's becoming, you know, more of a. But before, me too. I mean, growing up, and I used to have a martial arts teacher who would just, you know, don't drink coffee. I mean, it's kind of. You know, winds you up, and it's just kind of an old school thing. So you started drinking coffee and OJ and still eating the raw meat, you're saying?
Yeah, because I had this like system where I found I don't know if you know about this, but in Pennsylvania and a couple other states, there's Amish people.
I lived in Ohio when I moved from Russia,
okay.
So I know what's up.
So I found suppliers of like really high quality grass-fed raw dairy and all kinds of other like grass-fed meat and stuff that I would get a box of stuff from every week. And I just had this system where I would like put it in the freezer, and then I would take out a certain amount of meat and also raw beef fat and like blend them together. And I would have like, in my fridge, I'd have thawing out meat, and then I'd have the meat that was ready to go. And there was this whole system that I'd built up over years, and it was really efficient. I didn't have to think about it. So even just that, just kind of, it was like it's like, what am I going to eat if I stop eating this? Like, it had become such a normal thing. Like, if you have a routine that you do every day for, say, 3 years.
Yeah.
So I very slowly added other things to that routine. And then eventually, I don't think I stopped buying stuff from those farmers until I moved.
They make good
but
shit,
I started
man.
buying different things.
Yeah, they make good shit. They make, this the only people that make, I don't know if you know what farmer's cheese, that's what you guys call it here, farmer's cheese. You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
The Amish make, it's not quite cottage cheese, but that's the closest thing to, in Russia there's a thing called tvarog. It's very popular. It's like our sort of cheese, and all the bodybuilders and athletes kind of eat it. So that's kind of our version, because cottage cheese is like what's popular here, but it's not quite the same. So, and it's talking about dairy, because Ray Peat's thing is so huge on dairy and milk, and the 2 liters a day kind of thing he recommends. Why is he so adamant about calcium? I mean,
because he thinks the calcium phosphate ratio is like really important to the parathyroid in particular, and that it's kind of like a master metabolic regulator. I haven't looked too super into it, into the literature, although it's definitely true that there's a lot of phosphates in most foods, and that that the parathyroid does, make hormone that starts to do bone resorption, even if you're not deficient in calcium, but just you have like your ratio goes up of phosphates to calcium. So he seems to think that that's really important.
But it sounds like you're not convinced.
Well, I don't drink 2 liters of milk. I do take, I don't always do it, but just recently I made a bunch of, I have like a bag of gelatin capsules in my fridge, and I made a bunch of eggshell calcium supplements. Just like, I saved my eggshells and cleaned them off and boiled them, and then baked them in the oven to dry them off, and put them in a blender, and just put the powder into capsules. So I probably get a similar amount of calcium to what he recommends.
Close enough. So, and when you're not taking those pills, I mean, you're just not, you're just whatever, having cheese, stuff like that. I mean, what is your diet like nowadays?
It's always changing.
Yeah.
So, I eat a decent amount of cheese and meat. I try to put collagen powder and stuff like that, stuff to get my glycine ratio up in anything I can.
Why would you want to do that instead of just having meat by itself?
So that's a whole other Ray Peat topic of the amino acids, and so the sulfur amino acids, methionine and cysteine, in particular, are really high in meat, and also glutamate. And those have sort of negative effects, like metabolizing methionine is actually the main job of B12, and that's the main thing that gets messed up because when you're in the vegan world, one of the biggest topics is B12 deficiency.
Right, because everybody's deficient, and and everybody should be taking shots, and it's a big one.
So, and the reason why is because they can't metabolize those sulfur amino acids without that vitamin.
So their view, the vegan point of view, is that everybody used to get enough B12 from the soil, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And that everybody, not only vegans, are deficient now, because even if you eat animal products, you still can be deficient in B12. And so you're a goddamn animal killer, and you should stop eating meat. And so that's their view. And I mean, how true is that? Because I've also heard, read other studies where it says your B12 can be synthesized in your gut, right? So you don't even have to consume it.
So I haven't checked on a lot of this recently, but that most of that synthesis occurs in the lower intestine, and at that point, it's kind of too far for absorption.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not super relevant for your intake. But, there are some populations in certain countries that will consume feces.
Oh,
and
man.
The theory...
I want to move there. Where do I go, Kyle?
And they're vegan. They're usually or really highly vegetarian societies. So the theory is
like
that
Aboriginals in Australia or some shit like that? Because, I mean...
Actually, I think it's like a sub-Indian population.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, the idea... Now, this could be
man.
old information, and maybe this isn't true, but the idea is that they developed that practice because they weren't getting any B12 from their vegan diet.
Yeah, or they're just eating shit, man. I mean, who fucking knows?
Or it's just a fetish.
They're just into it. Oh, man. They have tea parties with it. Hey! Yeah.
But yeah, so glycine is... Actually, it's interesting. So a lot of the... the longevity research on calorie restriction?
Yeah.
This is one of the points that people make, is that a lot of those effects in animals like mice and rats can be replicated by giving them diets that are deficient in methionine.
That's an important point. So you're saying, if they were not to eat a lot of... Because muscle meat is the big source of methionine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any other foods that have that amino acid?
I think dairy has a decent amount of it. I think all the animal fats have a decent amount of it, and muscle meat is the highest.
So you're saying if they were to just eat collagen, which is deficient in methionine and gelatin, it could replicate that calorie restriction?
Yeah. So that's the other finding, is that the methionine restriction has benefits, and then also they found that playing around, kind of like with calcium and phosphate for parathyroid hormone, that the effects they were getting from methionine restriction could be replicated by just upping the glycine to methionine ratio. So, so you can try to reduce methionine, or you can increase glycine, or both. But it seems like that ratio is sort of a master regulator of. If you really want to get into it, it's like the mTOR pathway.
Right, which is all the bodybuilders love that fucking thing. mTOR.
Poster with
Yeah. I think I've seen one or two of them, as they're maxing out, they scream mTOR, So that's the big one. I mean, is there a basic way you can explain that thing?
Yeah, it's kind of like a master growth and cell activation node, biochemical node. And so the whole thing with methionine and those amino acids and mTOR signaling, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because it's really beneficial to causing muscle growth. And that's kind of the thing about growth, even growth hormone, and a lot of the hormones that people know are sort of bad, like estrogen, causes cells to divide and grow faster. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of this balance in the body where growth, obviously you have to grow at some point, and if you're trying to build muscle, your muscles have to grow. So those amino acids will stimulate muscle growth more than other amino acids. However, it has these other effects, things like inflammation and just other pathways that are sort of related with aging. So it's kind of like growth and aging kind of...
So sort of other things are going to grow along with it.
Yes, and just sort of the metabolic pathways that are required for growth also have these other effects that are sort of more in the aging world, and that so if you wanted to super totally maximize, and you can see this in bodybuilders, they take all kinds of stuff and maximize their size, and it's not healthy.
Right. Then they get elbow growths. Or their heads fucking triple the size. And they start to get
big guts. When they take hormone, their intestinal muscles grow and they get a bloated look. All kinds of things happen, and it's if you push that system, you push that growth system to its limits. It has all kinds of side effect targets other than just your muscles you want to look better.
Yeah, I work out at Gold's Gym over here in Venice, the kind of the mecca bodybuilding now known. And yeah, we have a lot of those guys that have the 8-month pregnant belly, but fucking six pack on top. It's just the best, the coolest looking thing ever. All the girls want that, Yeah. But I mean, when you're if you're a dude that's never lifted before and you start lifting and putting on muscle, that's what you're doing, is you're activating that pathway, mTOR. That's why all the bodybuilders mention it all the time. I mean, can you grow muscle? I mean, it's always going to get activated, right? It's not like you can grow muscle without it getting activated. It's just there's levels to it, yeah?
Exactly, yeah. Just like estrogen, like when like what you were saying about the person that lost her period, the vegan, like it's not, that's not good either. So it's not good to have like really high sex hormones and to have like a big up and down of like estrogen and progesterone fighting back and forth. Sometimes people will have like really painful and heavy periods from that. But at the same time, if those things fall below a certain threshold, you'll start to have issues too. So like with mTOR, it's just kind of like, because a lot of people, especially in the Ray Peat world, they sort of talk about things as if you could live forever if you just like did the right things,
Yeah.
Like if we just ate no PUFA and like suppressed estrogen and like cortisol as much as possible, it's like you live forever. And you could live longer, and you can be healthy longer. And who knows what the limit is, but the processes that our cells do to live and to grow are the same processes, like the mTOR pathway. Like that it's necessary. Like if you could take a drug that totally shut it down, 100%, you'd die.
Yeah.
So
it's not something that you're trying to avoid completely, which a lot of vegans talk about, I think, sometimes too, right? Because they mention that you don't want that pathway to be turned on or whatever. Or am I wrong about that? Maybe.
I've never really heard vegans talk about it. I mean, I've never heard vegans talk about something like that intelligent.
What do you mean,
a lot of
man?
them are like spiritually based, which is fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I've been there. I think we've all been there. Yeah, and so
it's true. I think that like vegetarians will have different health outcomes that are better in some ways because they are avoiding those amino acids. That's probably true.
So that's
but
what you think is,
yeah, they can't. Well, they're also avoiding a lot of iron.
Right.
Kind of artificially depleting themselves of iron and all kinds of things that synergistically can cause problems.
Yeah.
Like also if you're eating PUFA. So like if you're eating a standard American diet, so that's the thing. Like, I was in a debate once with a vegan, and he had all this data, and the data's, I don't think it's fraudulent. Like the average vegetarian in America will have less, whatever it's like, say cardiovascular disease than the average meat-eating American. But they're not comparing like a meat-eating person who is avoiding vegetable oil,
yes,
and stuff like that. They're you know what I mean, like that, the pool. So all of those data sets.
Yeah, what kind of meat are they eating? Like, yes, that is the big thing. That's me too. I get in these conversations a lot of time where it's like, were they meat versus no meat? I mean, like, are you talking about meat from fucking McDonald's every day, and the whatever, just packaged stuff and processed stuff? Or are you talking about like, fresh butchered stuff and liver and all those kind of good things? That is the problem. That's the big problem with those studies, is that people, like you said, people compare vegetarians to this and that. And I mean, and like you said, like I've always thought, if I had to be vegetarian, I could do it, just because I think, with cheese and eggs and stuff, I mean, it's totally doable. But going full vegan, just something about it, you just kind of feel, you don't feel that great. And iron is another thing that Ray Peat talks about often. Why? And you've heard certain guys say like iron is we're getting too much of it now, and it's in our foods. Is that true?
Yeah. The grain supply by law in America, and I don't know how many other countries, but several other countries, is fortified with iron. So, and also vitamins, but iron, and that they just like put iron shavings in there. It's really bizarre. How
did that come about that they started putting iron in there?
It all came about, I think it was either around World War II times or maybe the first half of the 20th century. But there were some issues. So there was a big, like, do you know about the Weston A. Price stuff with the nutrition and physical degeneration? So when he was doing his work, there was this difficult transition in modern societies where they were making processed foods, and it's seen as this great innovation, but they didn't understand that much about vitamins and minerals. Yeah. So there was like a generation or two where people were consuming these foods that were, say, like the process depleted whatever, vitamin B3 or something.
Right.
And then so there'd be a bunch of people with these really bad deficiencies, and this was not understood for a long time. And so the government was like, all right, well, so, what's the minimum amount that people need of, and then they picked a bunch of things like the B vitamins and iron, and they're like, well, we'll just take care of this by putting it in the grain supply, and everybody eats grains anyway, so there you go.
So iron, but why specifically did they choose iron? Is it because everybody was deficient? Because there was, the big sources of iron are meats, right? Or animal products. And so it was sort of deficient, and they just started putting iron into other foods.
Well, I think there's a lot of people will be anemic. That's another, deep issue is the cause of anemia. Mm-hmm. There's sort of this stereotype that if you're anemic, it's iron deficiency.
Yeah.
But from what I've seen, that's actually maybe not even half of the causes, clinically, of anemia, and that it could be a million other things.
I recently discovered that.
Kind of associate it.
Yeah, I recently discovered that because I used to have a girlfriend that was, anemic, and the one thing they told her just eat, take iron pills. And I was thinking, probably not a good idea, but researching Ray Peat, it's like, he has a different view. And if you're consuming animal products, you're basically getting enough iron, right? You're not getting sufficient levels. You're not going to be deficient in it.
Yeah, unless you have some sort of intestinal, weird genetic disease where you can't absorb iron. Yeah, it's actually, the thing with iron is, we hold on to iron. The reason why you can get toxicity with iron is our bodies are very thrifty with iron. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is pretty simple. In the wild or whatever, if you, lost a lot of blood, iron is totally super 100% necessary for oxygen transport in the body. So if you get really low on iron, that's it. You absolutely need it. Yeah. So you can imagine that, in our history as humans, when people didn't have access to a lot of meat, or, when people would get injured more and would bleed and lose a lot of blood, mm-hmm. we had to have bodies that were efficient with iron, to keep the bare minimum. And now we live in times where if people lose a lot of blood, they get, a blood transfusion, or, and we have ways to stop bleeding, stitches and all kinds of things. And people, at least in industrialized countries, have access to hot, foods with a lot of heme iron, like animal foods. Mm-hmm. So it's really not an issue anymore. So now it's basically this curse that we have, which is that our bodies are super thrifty with a mineral that is not so scarce for us anymore.
Right. Because they say, that's one of the theories, as some people say, that why women live longer, right? Is because they have their periods, so mm-hmm. they lose some of that iron. And what happens when you're consuming too much iron? What's the what are the studies? Is there any studies that you read? People consuming too much iron, what happens?
Yeah. So there's iron binding proteins, and there's a certain amount of iron that you want to have floating around, associated with ferritin and other proteins. And when you start to have excess iron, it starts to pop up in your tissues and in your blood unliganded and just free. Mm-hmm. And that's what you don't want. And the reason why is because, well, for example, when they make margarine and they make the trans fats, the process to make solid fats,
the good stuff,
out of
the tasty, the healthy,
they catalyze the reaction with nickel.
Yeah.
Because nickel can go through this electric state that like transfers the electrons with the hydrogens and artificially saturates the fatty acid chains. And so a similar reaction like that can occur in your body between iron, if it's associated with polyunsaturated fatty acids, and oxygen, or some kind of oxygen species like hydrogen peroxide, or a fatty acid that's already oxidized. Anything that has like a free accessible oxygen can. And so, yeah, it starts to catalyze these sort of like unapproved, unnecessary reactions that break things down.
And so when they tell people that they're anemic and they need to eat more iron, I mean, what are some of the other things that you said you were reading about that it could be?
Well, anemic basically just means that you don't have enough red blood cells most of the time. And one cause of that, because to produce red blood cells and to keep them alive, you need iron. So it's possible that somebody could be iron deficient, and that causes anemia. But there's a lot of other causes. One is B12 deficiency. If somebody's vegan, then that's a really likely cause. I think that's called pernicious anemia.
So we made it back to B12. Yeah, and, you know, that's good. It was a long roundabout. And so we were talking about B12, you know, and even recently, I don't know if you've seen Joe Rogan Experience, you know, the big debate he had there with the guy that created Game Changers, I think it's called, that vegan documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
Oh, it's hilarious. You got to check it out, dude. You'll have a blast. But you know, he debated Chris Kresser. You know who Chris Kresser is?
Yeah, I know him.
Sort of the ancestral kind of paleo food guy. They had a debate on Rogan's podcast, and this guy, he just came ready with the vegan knowledge. And I mean, in the debate, he spanked his ass, honestly, Chris Kresser, because Chris Kresser's kind of, you know, like, you know, nice guy, and that guy was fired up.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, and he had a lot of data, you know, talking about B12 and how that's why we shoot animals with B12, because the animals are also deficient with B12, like, you know, the animals that we consume, and that pretty much everybody's deficient. I mean, if you're consuming good quality meat, do you think you're getting enough B12? Should you be getting more B12? I mean, is it something, you know, is it smart to get one of those shots that people do sometimes?
Probably.
Is it worth?
I mean, you can.
Yeah.
You can take it orally. The only issue with oral B12 is that as you get older, you can absorb it less well. Because there's this, I think it's called intrinsic cofactor. This is like all stuff I just used to be really into when I was in like the vegan world, and now it's like I don't even think about it because it's like, well, who cares? I eat meat.
So you think you're covered?
Regardless, regardless of whether most people probably could benefit from more B12. Most people could probably benefit from more B vitamins in general. But the really severe, debilitating, chronic B12 deficiency symptoms, they really don't pop up in people that eat meat very often, and they pop up in vegans. So that guy can say that, and he can say like animals are deficient in B12, but like animals outside, they're not like having seizures or you know.
And I mean, yeah, what are those symptoms of like being deficient? Is it just a typical kind of like whatever, weak, fragile, kind of those? So those are symptoms, right?
It can like destroy your heart.
Yeah.
So you need to have that methionine get processed. It starts to actually kill heart cells, cardiomyocytes, I think, and also in the brain. So one of the early symptoms, and actually this is like, if you're having this symptom, then you've already had some serious damage from deficiency, but it would be like brain fogginess, confusion, and stuff like that. And eventually, I mean, you'll just, your brain and your heart will just, one of them will just stop working.
And so you're saying, and what if you're being vegetarian, you know, would you be able to, you think, is it possible to get enough B12 just from milk, dairy, eggs?
Probably.
Yeah. It would still be good. But meat obviously has more, and so does like the organ meats, like liver and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I also think that just all of the different things in something like liver, because it's like if you pull up, like just Google like B12 and like cofactor reaction. It'll give you the different biochemical processes it's involved in, and those all those reactions, it requires other vitamins too. So like, it's a whole kind of, to get from like, it's like, say, a 10-step thing to do this necessary process, and like B12 is needed for like, say, 3 of the steps, and then B3 is needed for this one. So it's a whole thing, and you need all of them. It's just that B12 is the hardest one to get.
Yeah, and so when we were talking about collagen, and so having too much of the methionine and is it tryptophan? That's the other amino acid.
Glutamate.
Glutamate.
Yeah. Well, that's because glutamate opposes glycine as a neurotransmitter, but tryptophan. That's the problem with tryptophan, is that it makes tyrosine.
Tyrosine. I'm sorry, I tripped
Yeah,
up.
makes serotonin.
So yeah, and then there's another whole bucket of worms there with the serotonin thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
The Peat thing. So if you're you think that it's valid to not overeat the animal, or at least balance out those amino acids with having some extra collagen or extra gelatin.
Yeah, I think that's actually, like, the paleo perspective works for that, because like, I don't know if you grew up with this, but like in American schools, at least in the 90s, the American Indians were romanticized, and it was like, oh, they used the whole animal.
Yeah. They took the blood. Yeah.
So, but if you think of it that way, like, if you consumed proportionately, with muscle meat that you eat, also like organs and skin, and made broth out of joints and stuff, I mean, you're balancing that out pretty well. So it's just, people don't do that today. People eat just the muscle meat,
just a steak, and just stuff like that. Yeah. Which is that seems to be the new era of the low carb or paleo, whatever the fuck you want to call it, is the carnivore guys that, they do eat nose to tail. I think that's what they call it, nose to tail diet, and so you're saying you're getting a much better balance of those amino acids, because if you're promoting too much growth if you're just eating muscle meat. If all you eat is just steak, you're getting too many.
Yeah, well, if you think of it like, so I tried to find this a while ago, but one of the classes I was in graduate school, the professor presented this really cool study where somebody found out the requirements for every amino acid, and they would like supplement an amino acid and they would be radio labeled, the carbons, I guess. I forget if it was the carbons or the oxide. They radio labeled something in the amino acid, and they would overfeed that amino acid and then test how much of it got made into glucose. And they would do that for each amino acid, and they would like make sure that the levels of the other amino acids were high. And so they could see, like, if we overfeed this amino acid, the body will use it for protein synthesis until this level, and then it'll start making glucose with it. And so if you think of it that way, right, there's like a certain requirement that we have for all the amino acids to build our bodies, okay? And our bodies are made up of more or less the same things as like other animals,
Yeah.
Like our skin and our bones and our muscles and our organs, they're like different sizes and stuff like that, but more or less, a cow liver has, the same amino acids and stuff as like a human liver. And so if you think of it that way, then eating the whole animal, basically gives you the type and amount of amino acids as you need to build your own body.
And I've heard Ray talk about somewhere where he says those, consuming a lot of those, methionine and I keep fucking it up. What's the other one?
The two sulfurs are methionine and cysteine.
Methionine and cysteine. So we're having them up to, age 25 or whatever while you're still growing is fine and productive. And then after that, you want to start slowing it down. You think it's kind of valid, huh?
Yeah, I think that's a good point for all those things that are growth factors, is that the negative effects probably really pick up when you're in a, like, growth slows down, because then it's sort of like you don't need them as much, so it's just going to push growth into processes that are more like aging than just growth itself.
Right. Okay. And so, okay. And how about supplements? You know, you mentioned you take some B vitamins now. Do you often do that, or is it just something you just kind of come and go whenever you feel like it? Or is there something that you take regularly?
I just started. I made my own B vitamins like a few weeks ago with those gelatin capsules, and I just bought like bags from, I think, Bulk Supplements, just like bags of powder, and scooped each one in one at a time into the capsules. And I've been taking those. For a while, I wasn't taking supplements. I'll go a long time without taking anything. I usually have a thing of K2.
Okay.
And like I'll dump that like a couple drops in, say if I make coffee that has like cream or milk in it, so that it gets into the fat.
And that's
I'm not super big on supplements.
Yeah, but that's one for sure. I don't know if that's not the. I mean, it's like usually like B12, maybe vitamin D and K2. Those are like the most talked about, you know, sort of supplements. But K2, I mean, nobody really talks about that one at all. And you know, even getting it from food is pretty tough. I think getting a good, unless if you're eating Parmigiano Reggiano, is that pretty much? Is that the source of K2, or I mean, is there?
I think that's the only source of like physiologically relevant K2 that you could get from eating a normal amount of food.
Or eating liver, right? I mean, you get some of that K2 in there. No,
I'm not sure. There's probably some in there, but I don't know if it's a lot. Yeah, K2. I thought K2 by now would have been in a fad because you can sort of, you know how like if you're paying attention to stuff online, you can see what people are what certain types of people are talking about, and you kind of can guess that in 2 years or 4 years or whatever, other people will be talking about it, and then after that, then it's like normal people are talking about it. Because I watched that happen with vitamin D.
Oh yeah. And why is K2? I mean, why is it important? And I mean, me too. I'm surprised nobody talks about it that much.
It's necessary for carboxylation reactions, so adding carbons from CO2 to mostly to proteins and then to other biomolecules, and it's kind of like it's Chris Masterjohn, actually. Do you read any of his stuff?
I read some of his stuff, seen some of his videos. Yeah.
I think he probably has the best stuff on there because he talked about carboxylation metabolism. It was probably like 5 years ago now, but he had a whole big series on it because I think that was one of the ways that he was sort of an early adopter from the paleo world of being skeptical of super low carb diets. And saying like, you know, carbs are probably okay. And one of the reasons he gave was that CO2 is good. And when you burn carbs, you have more CO2. And then he brought in the vitamin K thing and said, because people are like, well, why is CO2 good? He's like, well, this, and one of the things was it's necessary for all these vitamin K reactions to attach carbons from CO2 to the different proteins to activate them in your metabolism.
Okay, so you're saying if I'm like hyperventilating and breathing like Wim Hof and taking off my shirt and jumping into the ice cold baths, are you saying I'm doing the opposite of what's good? I mean, because talk about another fad, right? I mean, that thing is huge with everybody right now.
That's a real shame because
that's the way to put it. That's a real shame.
Like Wim Hof. He's kind of like similar to a power lifter. Like he's using a technique that makes his body able to do something, and it's impressive what he's able to do in the same exact way that it's impressive what competitive power lifters can do.
Right.
But the way they're using their body is not conducive to long-term health. And he's able to do like, he did that thing where I think he gave himself a virus, and then
I think it was endotoxin or something like that, and he cured it or whatever by doing the breathing techniques and all that.
I think he basically just raised his cortisol and like caused that kind of immune reaction, and it's like that will work.
And And yeah, and and you hate to be the guy. I hate to be the guy that's like judging how people look. I mean, I usually say like don't judge a book by its cover, but if it looks like shit, it's worth checking out and like getting to the bottom of it. I mean, and it's not like he looks like shit, but he is aging. I think in the last few years, like rapidly, and I don't know. I also had those thoughts of like, could it be that he's digging so deep into those crazy feats that he's doing that it's aging him a little bit. I mean,
well, I haven't seen his recent pictures, but I became aware of him maybe 3 years ago or 4 years, something like that. And I noticed immediately that he has a lot of like vessels in his nose.
Yeah, alcoholic's nose, yeah.
Yeah, and to me right away, because he's talking about this breathing and he's talking about his method and everything, and I'm thinking like cortisol, angiogenesis, nitrous oxide angiogenesis. So I think he's definitely, what he's doing is causing his body to like produce more blood vessels in different areas where maybe it's not good to have them be constructed there, and he's sort of like giving his body this false signal that it needs more vessels laid down.
Yeah, and I think it comes off, it's sort of all backwards these days. I mean, because again, CO2 is not, I mean, I don't know, I have never met anybody that actually talked about CO2 at all. And it's always talked about oxygen, getting more oxygen in your body. Oxygen is good. If you go to take a yoga class, it's like breathe into your heart chakra and get the oxygen in. It's always stuff like that. So, yeah. I mean, why is CO2 kind of a necessary, product in the body? And I mean, we know it as a byproduct, right? That's what they say. Mm-hmm. What's the importance of CO2?
Well, the importance of CO2, I mean, it's almost the same as like in a car. Like a lot of people are like, well, the exhaust is like the waste product. And on a certain level, that's true. Mm-hmm. But if you don't push the exhaust out of the car, you can't take in new air to combust into the intake of the front of the car, where the engine is, the air intake.
Right.
So it's like a necessary process. And similarly, if you don't have CO2 streaming out of your cells and binding and interacting with hemoglobin to knock off oxygen, you can't bring in new oxygen. So it's like a necessary sort of byproduct. But really, actually, one of my professors said something funny. Like somebody said, "Oh, CO2 is the byproduct of metabolism," and she was like, she got all like mad, and she was like, "It's the product of metabolism."
So professors are aware of that, like in your experience, yeah?
Well, yeah, she just meant in a purely biochemical, like stoichiometric sense. Mm-hmm. It is the product mm-hmm. of, attaching oxygen. You make CO2 and water by bringing in oxygen and attaching it to these energy molecules and stuff. So in that sense, like chemistry wise, it's like one of the products.
Right. So, but then you would have, if you talk to somebody, they'll tell you like, well, what about when I go to, not that I've been to Mount Everest or whatever, and I'm getting higher in elevation, there's more CO2, so I feel like shit. I mean, is that really what's happening, or is there a deeper thing?
That's hard to say. I mean, what we do know is that people adapt to that. So on a certain level, it's like, yes, if you have more oxygen available to a point, it's easier for you have to breathe less, for example. Mm-hmm. However, there is a point you can go too far with that, right? Which is like what you said with hyperventilation. Mm-hmm. So you need some amount of CO2, and you can kind of tweak your body. Like, for example, athletes that go and do altitude training, and then they'll be, adapted to a lower level of oxygen and a higher level of CO2, and then it becomes easier for them at sea level to compete. That's true. And it's sort of the same thing with CO2. You need CO2, and there is a certain amount. Like if you put somebody in an airtight container and they just exhale CO2, like they'll eventually die because
Right.
there'll be too much CO2. But it's the same thing with oxygen. If you were in a pure oxygen container, you would also die because you would be in a state of sort of like chemical hyperventilation. Like you would have too much oxygen and you wouldn't be able to get it off of the hemoglobin, so your cells wouldn't get oxygen.
So is it as simple as, I mean, saying that when athletes go to train at high altitudes, when they come back to, lower altitudes, is it because they've trained with less oxygen, or is it that they've improved their system, you think, by being
yeah, the less oxygen, like, it makes their system, so their system reacts just like muscles will grow. It's like they'll make more red blood cells, and I'm not sure if it stimulates significant mitochondrial growth, but it might. But definitely more red blood cells to transport the oxygen more efficiently.
Because that's the thing, so probably hyperventilating is not something super healthy to be doing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's inducing a stress reaction, and yeah, you can induce a stress reaction in your body and raise your temperature and give yourself that, his famous cold resistance,
cold plunge and all that
abilities, and stop infections, by causing that stress response, because you're basically inducing an immune response from your breathing practice. And yeah, it's like it's a tool. It's like using your body for this thing, but that does, like, it's like you're using up your body's kind of energy to do that, and it's going to like age you. There's a cost to it.
So yeah, because that's definitely becoming, everybody's on that. I mean, everybody famous is doing the cold plunges and all that. Oh yeah. Well, you seem like you're pretty good at keeping away from all that shit. You don't really stay on that too much. That's good.
Yeah, I don't even know how to follow. Like, the things I follow online are so wacky at this point. It's like really esoteric, like anime memes.
Oh,
or something.
Just straight anime porn and all that.
Yeah,
I gotcha. We'll cut that section out of the podcast. Just kidding. That's funny, man. Yeah, is definitely the big. I mean, everybody, doing the Wim Hof, doing the cold plunge. I mean, again, though, like it's definitely has a big history in Russia. Like, but in Russia, the way that we do it is like, you go into a sauna, you sit there, you steam your ass off, and then you jump into, a cold lake or a cold pool. But then you get out of it. You don't stay there. It's more of the idea being that you're opening your blood vessels and then constricting them again by jumping in the cold water and getting out. And then you do feel like a good sense of euphoria. But again, that could be just, feeling the stress responses you're saying. But yeah.
Yeah, I have some family from Sweden, and they do the same thing.
Yeah, it's good. They do that shit. Yeah, the European countries are big on that. Well, it's awesome, man. Well, dude, I think that's about. You've been so generous with your time, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, hey, if you want to chat more, we could chat more. I don't know. if you're hanging out. What's like been? Have you learned? What's like the most? Not the most, but the coolest thing you learned last year? I mean, anything physiology-wise, health sphere-wise?
That's a good. I don't know. I'm not sure I would remember. Most of how I learn now is if I want to write something or make a video.
Yeah.
Like while I'm doing the research for that. So like right now, I'm actually working on a video right now about. It's about keto. I'm actually trying to make a YouTube video that like upsets keto people.
Oh no, dude. Don't do that.
And the topic is going to be about why you have to use glucose, like, glycogen and stuff for high intensity exercise.
Right.
And so I'm going through and explaining on the most minute level I can. So I'm like every enzyme in the like beta oxidation and in glucose, like glycolysis, before getting into the oxidation of like the citric acid cycle and all that.
Yeah.
And the speed of those enzymes. And so like to demonstrate how if you're doing something like, say, lifting weights, you can't get the amount of ATP to have the power, the ATP production over time that you need for a muscle contraction from the speed of the enzymes of, beta oxidation of fats.
Yeah. And just even on a personal level, it's like you would think, because I think, again, we've all been taught a little bit backwards where it's, cardio exercise, you need a lot of carbohydrates, and maybe if you're not running so much, you don't need. I mean, I think that would be the average person's thought process is like, if you're just sitting around and benching or whatever, you don't need that much carbs because you're just sitting there and your heart rate's not that high up. But even from a personal experience, it's like, I would be running and I would be completely fine if I just ate ground beef and whatever, cashews. But in the gym, definitely, doing like a workout when you want to do a shit, high intensity stuff, pull-ups, push-ups, blah, blah, blah. You want to do it fast. You definitely eating more carbs, you always perform better. Or if I didn't eat carbs, I would always crave them like crazy after a workout like that. So, it seems to be, I mean, there's a lot of people that do the keto thing long term, I think, and they do the workouts, but I don't know if they're, constantly improving their fitness, or maybe, because it's tough to tell with these things, because a lot of people like the vegan stuff, right? It's like you've been, fucking Tom Brady or whatever, he's been like 30, 40 years, at the top of his game, best player in the world, everything is amazing, hot wife, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes vegan for 2 years, and he says like, well, the vegan diet has built me. And it's like, well, the way I look at it is like, well, motherfucker, like, you've been, you have massive amounts of talent already, just the way you're born. And then, for the last 2 years or even 5 years, you've been vegan. To me, it's like you've climbed this mountain, and it's like to get down from it, it's going to take some time. So that's why it's hard to judge these crazy diets, I think, of course.
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that I learn these days, which is like really sort of overly detailed things about like, oh yeah, the rate of this step in glycolysis is way faster than this step in glycolysis.
Yeah. And what's your YouTube channel? Is it a YouTube thing you're saying, or are you just writing now?
Yeah. Well, I still have to make the video, but I'm like sort of making my notes that I'll use on the video for it. So I'm like gathering that's the longest part, is getting all of because sometimes it's really hard to get very basic scientific numbers.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy. Like people don't know basic science. They'll say, oh, they'll just kind of assert something.
Yeah.
And they haven't actually like read a paper where, like, they don't know where that came from. They just heard it somewhere. And, it's probably true or whatever, but they don't, like, really understand where it came from. So, yeah, my YouTube channel is Nutricrinology.
Cool, man.
So it's, like, nutrition and endocrinology.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I love your little video about the alien space epidemiology, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. It's a great one. I send that one out a lot, actually. So if
thank you.
Yeah. If you're out there, you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a good one. Talking about the oils and the sugars. Yeah, man. So I mean, and it's hard to give anybody advice these days, especially about diets, because boy, I mean, fuck, it's like so personal these days. But I mean, if there was one thing that you could say for people could do just to like improve their health, not to be preachy about it, but what would it be?
That's a good one.
Would it be avoiding the oils, or would it be having more sugar? Would it be watching more vegan videos, or being fruitarian?
I would say like a long-term thing would be avoiding the oils. That's not something I would expect somebody to get like an immediate benefit from, though.
Yeah.
Maybe like an immediate thing. It's like just make sure you're eating enough protein. I mean, so many people don't eat enough protein, especially young women.
Yeah, big time.
And people don't know. Like you can use there's some free websites and apps and stuff where you can just put in what you're eating, and you don't have to, you don't have to do it every day, and you don't have to like be super hardcore, but you can get an idea of some of these numbers, and you should try to get like, maybe 100 grams of protein a day.
Yeah. Because especially nowadays with, veganism being so popular, I think a lot of people are, they're just initially turned off if you even say like, hey, you should eat more protein, because they immediately have that picture of the, the pregnant belly guy with the six pack that's like, eat more protein. And that's really why people are turned off by it. It's not even because that, they don't necessarily want to eat more protein. I think just they picture that guy, you being that guy, and then they turned off by it, and then they, read some. Do you think it's possible on a vegan? How about eating the beans and the Impossible Burger? It's fucking disgusting, by the way. And all those.
I've never tried it.
Oh, don't check it out. Check it out.
So, I don't think so. Well, okay, you can probably be like a normal lean person, maybe with some muscle tone, I guess, if you exercise with vegan sources of protein. But I don't think you can build like an above average like weightlifting physique on vegan protein, because like I said, even with those sulfur containing amino acids, they're pretty deficient in the vegan proteins, and even though they have these potential negative side effects, like they're necessary to stimulate protein synthesis in the muscle. So it's like, it's not just getting this many grams of protein. It's like the protein quality is really hard, and I've seen people mix them, but even still.
Yeah, and that's one thing that vegans do bring up a lot is because if you look at the older science, to my knowledge, even if you read like fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger's bodybuilding book, which I don't know if you've, it seems to be like everybody's got that when you're like a teenager, get that super encyclopedia book, the thick one. It seems like, he had a chart in there, and it's, the quality of protein, and it was milk and eggs, and then meat, and then all the other stuff, soybeans, blah, blah, blah. But these days, a lot of these vegans, they're pulling out studies that show that no, they're the same quality. Like if you eat a garbanzo bean, it's about the same thing, and that's one thing that they will stick it to you because they say it's the same thing. So I don't know if they're the same quality or not.
Well, I think the quality chart that came from that study or similar studies about how much of each amino acid you'll use for protein synthesis until you start using it to make glucose. Mm-hmm. And they took that, and they took the different ratios of the amino acids, and then looked at foods, and then basically said, okay, like eggs have closest to what we've found as sort of the optimal ratio of amino acids that you need of any like food. So that's why it's at the top of the chart.
Mm-hmm. So you think it's still pretty much animal protein has a better quality amino acids than...
Yeah, I think the science is pretty good there, but also just observing, like you can go and look at vegan bodybuilders.
Yeah, that's what I always say.
And they don't have like a fullness. They have like a depleted.
It's steroids, bro. It's steroids, bro. That's always the thing, and I agree with you. That's my always the thing was like, because again, when you start talking about diets, it's always personal, and people always think you're just trying to shove your shit at them, and it's like, no, same thing with me. Just from personal experience, when I tried being vegan, the muscle was just not there, and then as soon as you eat steak and milk and whatever whey protein, it definitely looks better. And that's what I always say. Like bodybuilders are my I love to use them because I always say, like genuinely speaking, if a bodybuilder, if you told a bodybuilder eat dog shit and it's gonna make your muscles look better, and it worked, every fucking bodybuilder that would be eating it, no doubt, because those guys do crazy stuff. They do HGH and insulin and all kinds of good shit, and
they're super like they do things if they're effective, and if they don't, they don't do it just to do it. They don't eat meat just because Schwarzenegger told them to eat meat. They just do it because that works, and that's what I'm saying. Like if they told them, like I said, eat dog shit, they would all be eating dog shit. Or if vegan protein was the most effective protein at building muscle,
all the vegans would be, I mean, all the bodybuilders would be vegan, and it doesn't matter whether they're using steroids or not. Though, I mean, yeah, because we all know all the vegan bodybuilders are all natural for sure. I mean, no doubt, no doubt. There's no testosterone prescriptions there. Yeah, and I mean, hormones-wise, how much research have you done into like testosterone, estrogen, all those sort of things?
The lab that I was in graduate school was an estrogen lab.
Oh, okay.
So I know a lot about estrogen just from like the endocrinology world of it, of like research. But I actually, in terms of like the things that a bodybuilder kind of person would know about testosterone and like the different synthetic,
appropriate, all those things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually, like, the average bodybuilder probably knows more about that stuff than I do.
Oh, yeah, they do. Well, yeah. But estrogen, I mean, is it as evil as it say? Is it, is it the female hormone, quote unquote? Is it not?
Well, I'd say just like, cortisol and these other things, some of the other things we were talking about, it's like a necessary evil. So there is some amount of estrogen that even probably men need, like some small amount, in your cells in different situations. And of course, women need it to like menstruate and go through their cycle. And so for them, it's really a necessary evil, because really what a cycle is for a woman is like, it's kind of like a little like temporary cancer. That sounds bad,
just temporary.
Because the uterine lining grows, like the cells proliferate, right?
Right.
Like really fast, in a way that, like, if it was a different tissue in your body, would be like, you'd be like, oh, that's a tumor, like the way that the cells are growing. But it's stopped because the progesterone comes in, and that system of having that that hormone profile gets knocked down at the end of the cycle. So then it goes away, and then that's menstruated out, and then it repeats again. So it's like this little, and of course, and there's all kinds of negative side effects, like, it changes women's mood, and might make them like retain water or whatever. Like, different people have different symptoms. So in that sense, it's bad. Like it causes stress to cells. It causes them to not work as well. But it's necessary, especially in the female physiology, to have that cycle. So that's the way I see it.
And the way that they're getting prescribed, because the pill is, hugely prescribed. I mean, and I've worked with clients, that have had like really bad stories with them, or and it always seems like, again, like just with the diet thing, it seems to be like initially a lot of great benefit, a lot of good stuff happening, and then this kind of, just chaos that happens later on. I mean, have you noticed that yourself? Well, not that you've been on the pill, but have you read about that?
Yeah, it seems to be like, well, I mean, there's so many different types, and I haven't kept up with, like, for example, like 15 years ago or something, like, whatever pill, like some girl I might have been dating in college, like it's probably a different, either a different type of hormone or different, doses and stuff like that. So they're always changing, but I've seen some pretty crazy stuff. Like I had a coworker once who was a little bit older than me. I was like 25 and she was like 30, and she went off the pill, and she said afterwards, like, she had all this erratic mood swings when she first went off of it, and then she was like, when I was on the pill, like, I didn't realize it, but I was like numb.
Yeah.
Like she didn't have a sex drive.
Yeah.
And just all kinds of things in her mood. Like she just felt like suppressed, and she didn't, I guess it came on slowly. Like probably when she first started taking the pill, when she was whatever age, it probably wasn't a big deal. And then just over time, it's like 5 years go by, another 5 years go by, and all of a sudden, like, all of these things have changed, and like your whole hormonal profile is different, and your body is sort of has accustom itself, kind of like if you were on testosterone replacement, you know.
Yeah, you get that initial same thing when you feel like shit afterwards. Although everybody's different. Have you heard of Anthony J? Dr. Anthony J?
No.
He has a book called Estrogeneration, I think it's called. It's just he's this doc. He works at Mayo Clinic. Pretty good book. He has a lot of stuff about just in how many places estrogen is found. All the plastic stuff, all the your meat is wrapped in it. So I mean, in that sense of view, it seems like it's something that you should pretty much be avoiding as much as you can, right?
Well, that's why I would say it's not like the female hormone, because
yeah.
Because progesterone, I think, has a better case to be made for being called the female hormone. Because first of all, it's more specific to females.
Right. And a lot of people experiment, with the famous Peat progesterone stuff. Have you tried it yourself?
I think I tried somebody I was dating was trying it, and I tried a drop of her stuff just to see, and I didn't really notice anything. I mean, I could kind of feel like a numbness in my gums, a feeling of it, and I think maybe just a general relaxed feeling.
And so Peat supplements and the three big ones, I guess, are progesterone, pregnenolone, and thyroid. Have you experimented with those yourself or no?
I actually just bought a bunch of. So I tried synthetic thyroid once, but it was a friend of mine gave me her expired prescription. So I don't know. And I was also taking a really small amount because I'm pretty conservative with taking stuff. And if I'm going to take a drug or something, and I'm monitoring myself, so there's sort of nobody looking after me other than myself, so I have to be careful.
Yeah.
So I'll take I'll start with a really small dose, I'll cut up the pills and stuff like that. So with that time I didn't notice anything, but I just bought some desiccated thyroid, so real deal thyroid, and I'm gonna try that soon. I bought some pure T3 and some mixed T3 T4 stuff.
Cool. And so that's surprising because you've been in the Peat world for a while now, right? But you haven't really, because that is the one big it's not even an argument. It's just people tease you about Peat. It's if you if it's anything, it's the thyroid. If it's that's kind of people make fun of you. It's oh yeah, it's probably your thyroid. Oh dude, I can't do. I couldn't get 115 up on the bench yesterday. Dude, it's your fucking thyroid. You should check it. So that really seems to be the big tease about Peat. I mean, and looking at his stuff. I mean, do you think a lot of those things do have because I mean, looking at it myself, it seems like there is a lot of, it's never one thing, but it just seems that thyroid is so interwoven in so many things. I mean, is his point of view, I mean, is it valid? Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think that thyroid, it's maybe not the only really good indicator of overall health and involved in everything, but it's definitely one of them. It's if you have a serious chronic disease, or if you're deficient in a nutrient on a serious level, thyroid is, probably going to be affected.
And so, people doing a full thyroid panel, because it's definitely not one thing that your doctor ever want to fucking check with you. I mean, it's probably, he would rather, I mean, he'll give you a statin, and whatever else right away. But as far as thyroid, it's you're fine. You're going to be fine, dude. It's just thyroid,
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I'm getting really annoyed at doctors actually, because I've just, it's crazy. I'm always trying to find a different doctor, a new doctor.
Oh man, same here. I have that obsession too. Sorry. Yeah. And
I'll go in there and it's they'll ask me, I'll explain, look, because when I was doing my PhD, I was in an endocrinology lab, so it's look, can I just like sort of talk to you about what I want here, and they would talk. It's like the lack of respect and just sort of. It feels like such a fake interaction. Like it feels like basically the doctor comes in and they're a representative of like insurance companies,
100%.
and they're just like, well, we don't want to pay. Like, yeah, and like all they're hearing in their head is it's going to be hard for me to justify this test,
yeah, the
full thyroid panel, to the insurance company, and I start to feel that, like I sense that in the interaction, and I'm just like, wow, I hate this.
Yeah, I've had that experience with many doctors, and it's fucking hard. But, and then you'll go to a different type of doctor. You'll go to the, Chinese herbal medicine doctor or whatever, because you're trying to find something different, and they'll just talk to you about something completely fucking nonsensical, and it's just like, well, how is your relationship with your father? How is it? And you're like, it's good, man. No, I can feel something. I mean, I had one guy, I went to this acupuncturist once. Oh, man, I went to this fucking acupuncturist. Well, if you don't have a camera, sorry for this. But anyway, I walk in, and this guy, he's staring at me, and he's like, hey, how you feeling? And I'm like, good. And he's like, you want to tell me? And he's trying to be deep as shit, and it's just like, I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to tell me that, like, your mood affects you, and it's not like to say it's all nonsense, because I think all of those doctors have some truth in it, at least. You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, it's just it seems to be either this doctor, like you said, that he just wants to like, oh, get the fuck out of here. You're fine. You're 30 years old or whatever. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. Or you have the other guys who, want to check your asshole for your chakra or whatever. And it's just like, my God. So it's so hard to find. I'm in the same boat with you, man. It's so hard to find like somebody who has like, or at least is like open to, like you said, just talking about ideas and stuff like that. So have you ever done like a full thyroid panel and checked all that stuff? And
yeah, but not for like a couple years. Usually when I try to like get a new doctor and stuff, I can usually convince them as like a new patient to get like a thyroid panel and like the sex steroids and some other things like that. But so yeah, sometimes they're just like, well, do you have? Because it's all about like if you have symptoms of something, and it's like, yeah, maybe my symptoms are, I think I could be healthier if my thyroid.
It's like you wish that, I don't know, in Florida weed's not illegal, right? It's illegal still. It's not like it's illegal.
I don't even know. I can't keep up with.
Well, in California it's legal. So, but like in California, you can go to. I mean, not that you need to now. Now it's just you don't need a prescription. But before, you could go in and you could just tell them like, I'm sleeping bad, man, and they're gonna be like, oh, that's it. You need fucking medicine, So you just kind of wish sometimes that those doctors would be the same with. I mean, it's just a test, right? Because you think it's just a test. It's not like you're giving me ecstasy. I mean, you're just fucking giving me you're just getting a test. I mean, so is there things that not that you have patience or anything, but I'm just saying, like, do you think there's some certain things that people should be checking? Maybe not at least, not all the time, but at least regularly, like a thyroid panel or like you said, the sex steroids. I mean, which ones, and what would be the things?
Yeah. I mean, if you can get a full thyroid panel, then you should do that, because that's if you're having some sort of problem, it would just be super helpful to see if your like T3 is low or something, or if your TSH is high, or if they look good, just to rule that out as a cause. That would just be super useful. And as a man, like making sure your testosterone is in a normal range, because like, if you feel like crap, it could very easily be that. CO2, so that's a cheap one. Like, I think no matter what blood test you get, you can just have them throw CO2 in there.
Oh, that's not one you hear commonly at all. I don't think I've ever had anybody test that.
Yeah, I think that's cheap and easy, and you can just ask them to do that. And usually it'll be in a normal range, because CO2 is one of those things that if it was actually out of the normal range, like, you'd know.
Yeah.
You'd be messed up. But what it can do, that's one thing that, like, say you get blood work done once a year. If you notice over the course of 5 years that your CO2 has gone from like high normal to low normal, that's almost similar to like a low thyroid, because that's indicating that your metabolism is shifting towards fatty acids. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like an indication of like a pre-diabetic state, and that's something that you can look at. It's easy to understand, and it's an easy test to get.
Okay, and then you said the sex hormones. You just mean like testosterone? Do you mean or do you mean checking like because it's also, you do get sometimes kind of weird with the tests where certain tests are good and certain tests they say are not really good. Like, for example, I've had like magnesium tested, like red blood cell count, and on one side it's like that's the most accurate way to test it, and then the other side, I had somebody else, a doctor, tell me actually that you would have to literally chip or open up your bone to find out how much. So you don't know. It's like, which ones. So like, what about like pregnenolone and progesterone, which you always hear about in the Peat kind of side of things?
Yeah, I'm not sure if blood tests for that are too useful. The one that I hear Peat people talk about a lot is what's the milk producing hormone?
Prolactin.
Yeah,
that's the one. Yeah.
That's actually more of a good indication of a problem with estrogen and other hormones, is if your prolactin goes up.
Okay, and that's one doctors, if you tell them that as a guy, they'll fucking, it would always be more normal if you just kicked them in the balls right in the spot. I mean, they look at you like, what is wrong with you? Because they say that you literally have to have man boobs, like real man boobs, in order to test that. But I've also heard that. I've never had it done. And I think, is it the prostaglandins, the other ones that maybe some of the Peat people talk about? Or
I don't. Yeah, are those the inflammatory markers, like the normal ones that you get?
Yes, I can't quite remember the name, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some inflammatory peptides in a blood panel before, but I didn't pay too much attention to them because they were all like really low. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that would be a good indication. And for a lot of that stuff, like I was saying with CO2, it's kind of like taking your temperature. You know how people will say like after a meal or in the morning, take your temperature. Mm-hmm. It's good to have that number, but what's really good is to have that number and then compare it to that same number, say 6 months later after you change your diet.
Mm-hmm. And just see the difference. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the directionality of things for a lot of these tests is more important, or it's more easy to, because again, I mean, some of these numbers are pretty stable, but like you could test, say your thyroid number could be normal, but it could be getting worse.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's all kinds of factors like that day. It could just like maybe you just had a healthy week or whatever. I don't know.
Sure.
And
or vice versa,
but
right?
But if you get it tested over time, like I've gotten blood pressure tests before at the doctor, mm-hmm. and like I've given myself 1 million blood pressure tests because it's the same thing. In that class I taught, I had to teach students how to take blood pressure, so I've done it to myself like hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've had nurses be like, "Oh, for whatever reason, like
it's high."
Because I had like an 8 o'clock appointment, mm-hmm. and like I didn't eat anything, and so I like show up and I'm all like kind of dehydrated and all cortisoled up from just waking up, and they're like, "Oh, your blood pressure's a little high."
Yeah, it's funny because I had the exact same thing happen, and they're like, "Your hemoglobin is a little raised," and it's just because you're dehydrated. You didn't drink anything or eat anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because they want you to drive like, I mean, I don't know. In LA here, you probably heard of the traffic. I mean, to drive somewhere, it's like 30-40 minutes in traffic, and you're sitting there, you're hungry, and then, I mean, by the time you're in the doctor's office, you're just everything is probably up. If you were able to measure your cortisol, I'm sure it would be high. And I've had the same thing. And I mean, as far as blood pressure, have you looked into the research on blood pressure? I mean, and because for example, I have a book from maybe 20-30 years ago, and in that book it was like 140 over 80 or 90 is like a very good blood pressure, normal. Then I have a book that's a little bit like maybe 10 years after that, was written 10 years later, and it was like 130 over 80s, what is really healthy. And then now if you Google it, 140 is hypertension.
Yeah.
They're calling it hypertension. I mean, what's happening there?
Yeah, it's the same thing that they're doing with blood sugar. I think they lowered the fasting, like what used to be pre-diabetic is diabetic, and they're kind of ratcheting that down. I mean, you could be conspiratorial and say like,
you goddamn
they
conspiracy theorists, you got don't you do
yeah,
it?
like maybe they want to be able to prescribe more blood pressure medication.
You must think the Earth is flat. You think the Earth is flat, don't you? You son of a bitch. Yeah, it's strange, right? So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, because I had the same thing happen. They told me it was high, then I started monitoring, and then I'm like, it's 130. That's my average, basically. And it's like, the books say it's fine, but I mean, now it's getting close to hypertension, you know. Although at the same time, if you're under 30, they won't prescribe you that shit. You know, I've also started looking at that, you know. But if I was 66 and I had that blood pressure, the doctor probably would freak out and, you know, fucking, okay, we need to do, you know, lowering medication. But who knows?
You know what's funny about that is, so they're changing the standards for healthy blood pressure, and that's probably going to change the amount of prescriptions for blood pressure medication, and they're changing the standards for fasting, you know, hyperglycemia, and that's probably going to change prescriptions for, like, you know, anti-diabetic, like what do they give?
Insulin?
Yeah, it's a bit like there's drugs like
like sugar lowering things.
There's like but what they're not ever going to do, because I don't know if you saw this, but a couple months ago, I think one of the big medical associations said that they're lowering the standard for the normal body temperature.
Oh, yes. And actually I've read maybe a year or two ago, that doctors have noticed that the body temperatures have been going down, and it's like, it's a problem. And then I couldn't find that fucking article any longer. Conspiracy theory, I don't know. We didn't land on the moon, but it's interesting. So you're saying so what are you saying about it though? You're saying they're not going to lower that?
Well, no, I'm saying they lowered it, but what they're not going to do is start prescribing people thyroid, because, but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, what are you, fucking Alex Jones? You son of a bitch, Kyle. You son of... Yeah, it's interesting. So, yeah, and looking at the history of thyroid, I mean, you probably know the Ray Peat perspective on it, right? And the what's the guy that wrote the book Hypothyroidism? The pioneer.
Rhoda Barnes.
Yeah. Are you a fan of that book? Have you read it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in that book, right, it's like he goes through all the tests, the protein bound iodine test and all that, and he just tells you why. I mean, basically, they're stupid, and you should just be monitoring your temperature. Do you monitor your temperature? Is it something you do?
Yeah, I'm not super good with it, but I have like a little sort of crappy digital thermometer that, again, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but I just make sure that like my temperatures aren't going down,
right,
as measured by that thing, you know.
Yeah. Because that's something that I've noticed, you know, it's like when I was low carb, which I just wasn't aware of it at all. Definitely eating carbs was like upping my temperatures, and I think that's definitely, you know, I mean, everybody keeps track of their weight and whatever body fat, but I think the temperature one is probably pretty important to be, you know, looking at, because I definitely know a lot of people that get cold hands and cold feet and all that stuff. Yeah, it's interesting, man. That thyroid story. Yeah,
and I definitely believe, because if you look, like what I was saying about the blood pressure medication, like if you look at, there's just this kind of culture amongst doctors, like it's really weird the way, they don't like thyroid. They don't like the idea of giving people thyroid that haven't had their thyroid gland removed, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you have thyroid cancer, they're more than happy to remove your thyroid gland.
Oh yeah. They fucking love that. Come on. Yeah, it's so true. I had a friend that was just basically had some inflammation in there, and they were like, all right, let's cut it out. And he's like, fucking give me a minute. I mean, what? And then in a week or two he went away and everything was fine. But like, it's crazy to think that this fucking guy could have had his fucking thyroid removed, and I mean, there's not even like, it's the same thing with like, I remember wisdom teeth here in America. I mean, they love pulling those fuckers out too. I mean, I remember a doctor telling me like, your teeth are going to be crooked in a year. I'm just telling you. And I mean, I have all 4 of them, by the way. Never got them pulled out. Everything is fine. I mean, maybe one day they will, but it's definitely a culture upon its own, I think. And it's not to say that doctors are assholes, of course. I mean, it's just like, it's probably the way they're taught, right? I mean, yeah, getting into conspiracy theory area again.
Yeah. Well, I work at a medical campus, and like when classes are in session and stuff, like the building I'm in, there's the medical school building where the medical students take their classes is right next to it, and they have a nice cafeteria. Mm-hmm. And they don't really use it. So it's like this empty cafeteria. So I'll eat lunch there sometimes. And then when the classes get out, like down the hallway, I'll see, 30 medical students come out of the door and walk down the hall and go to the parking lot or wherever they're going. And I look at them, and there's like...
Be honest now.
Yeah, there's like a certain... What it is they're all like high achieving... They don't really look like they're out there to like, help people and...
Yeah, and it's not to say that they're out there to kill people. It's just that, it's just it's a check mark kind of, right? It's like getting it done, and I have a doctorate degree, and everything else is chiropractic, and everything else is fucking bullshit. And
it's like type A personalities and people that are and their legal incentive, like if a doctor does something that by the book, mm-hmm. even though it's totally stupid, like you can tell this is the wrong thing to do, but it's kind of the normal practice, they won't get in trouble, even if it's clearly a bad decision. However, if they make a decision that is a good decision, like would have a high probability of being a good idea, but it's an unusual treatment and it goes wrong, now they're liable.
Yeah.
So the liability structure of the medical industry is like, it's crowd logic. So like if you go against the crowd, you're liable. Whereas if you just do what all the other, like it's kind of like, investors, like everybody that lost money on their like mutual funds in 2008. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like all the companies are just like, well, we were just doing what everybody else was doing, so it's okay. And that's actually like how doctors are. Like they're just, well, I just did the best, like I did what the book says is the normal thing. Like,
it's definitely a weird culture we're creating, and now it seems that there's less people wanting to become doctors. I mean, I've read somewhere that like people going into doctorate, everybody's going into like physician assistant or just like nurse practitioner, those kind of high level things that are associated with being a doctor. But it's like, in a way, if you want to get conspiracy theorist on it, it's like what that means is there going to be less doctors making big decisions, right? And going to be big government agencies making decisions for the doctors, and then the nurses are just there for the ride because they're just doing what they're told. They don't really want more people to being able to do their own thing.
Yeah, it's definitely moving in a direction that, like what we were talking about, where it's like, oh, I want to get I'd like to get a thyroid panel because I want to assess it for myself. That's not going to become easier.
yeah. And it's every time there's a doctor that goes out of his way and creates his own Instagram page and just starts kind of doing, or Facebook or whatever, just being out there in the social media world talking about things like that. Like there's a recent dentist guy that I found, I think his name is Joel Gold, and he's just talking about how important vitamin D is and vitamin K, and it's like as soon as somebody like that is out there, that word gets thrown out right away, conspiracy theorists. I mean, it's like the ultimate, like, it's like recently what's happening, like in the US, it's like, well, I think this, and it's like, well, no, it's this, and then it's like, well, but I think it could be that, but it also could be this. You're racist. And that just ends all of it. You know what I'm saying? And that's the same thing with the conspiracy theory. It's just like, it's over. You're a conspiracy theorist. And yeah, it's really sad because people get so discouraged, I think, they don't have fucking other options to, what's going to happen next. Yeah. Well, man.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, like sometimes when you watch movies and stuff, like, those Sherlock movies, the Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr.?
Yeah.
Did you see any of those?
God, they fucking suck, dude. Come on. They suck. Come on. Just admit it.
Well,
it's not this. It's not the same Guy Ritchie. It's not the stock, lock, and two broken. I fucked that name up, didn't I? Lock, stock, and two smoking barrels. Stock. Come on, it's not.
Well, yeah, it's not. No, they're not as good of films as those other ones. But I'm actually kind of a Robert Downey Jr. apologist. I kind of like that guy.
Yeah, but, he's a great guy. Yeah.
The Watson, as a doctor, there's a few scenes where he's being a doctor,
Yeah.
Like back in London in like 1890 or whatever year that was. And it's so interesting, like when you see an historical piece, even if it's fiction, portray the difference. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot more technology now, and there's like a lot of devices and drugs and stuff that can save people that would have otherwise died, but like the human interaction there, and like the sort of, just the idea that it's like, okay, this person's working for you and they're going to try to help you versus like there's like other interests.
Yeah, you're going into this, prescription pad guy, and he might give you something, maybe not, right? It's like, like you said, that human interaction, which, in some ways it's like a lot of people, I think, in some ways it's better because, I mean, at least in the US, if you have a lot of money, I think you can definitely find a doctor like that, and have a chat with them. But the problem is that, again, if you don't, it's like, it's just show up and get the fuck out of here. Whereas some like, for, it's a little bit, and it's not even, doesn't have to do with you being poor. I mean, even if you have enough money, but you're just not, you're not Robert Downey Jr., obviously. I mean, I think you literally would have to be at his level to find one of those doctors that are willing to kind of try this and try that, or, what's the guy from Braveheart? What's his name?
Mel Gibson.
His, I don't know if you've heard, he's like super into stem cells, and he's just shooting it up everywhere into his eyeballs. I mean, just all over the place. So, yeah, like, and he was on, with this doctor, and they're super like, shooting ideas back and forth, and it's probably what it should be, probably the way the system should be, where it's like you said, it's just, you're coming in there and you're just, maybe you'll get out, maybe not, and they don't really even want to have your conversation. If you tell them like, well, I was eating, I've had it before, it's like, well, I tried not eating salt, and my blood pressure stayed exactly the same, and they're like,
right.
And they just go, no, you probably didn't notice that, you probably were eating it, and it's just like, but I tried eating more salt. I tried eating like a shitload more salt, and it didn't go down, but it didn't go up either, and it's like, it's just, they don't want to even hear about your diet. They don't want to hear about, how you sleep.
Yeah.
Just take some melatonin, you'll be fine. Which I don't know. I've actually, speaking of melatonin, I heard Ray Peat somewhere say that you produce, I don't know what the exact number was, but it was such a small, like, microgram. Do you know how much melatonin your brain produces at night?
No.
It's like, he said it was something so minuscule, like, I don't remember, maybe whatever, 0.2 micrograms or something. Maybe it was more. I don't know if somebody's out there. Sorry. But, yeah, but then you'll take like a 10 milligram melatonin pill, And for me, it never actually worked. It always just made me feel like shit in the morning. That's the only difference that I felt with melatonin. I don't know if you ever experienced that.
I've never tried it, but that's one thing most of my life I've never had a problem sleeping. I could just sleep whenever.
Lucky. That's a good skill to have, man.
Yeah.
Well, man, Yeah, I think that's about. I don't know if what else I can ask you about, man. How's the situation in Florida with the corona?
Well, it kind of sucks, man. I have it.
You have it.
Yeah.
You got tested? Really? How long you
Yeah, I
been?
tested positive. It was like 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
I never really got sick though. Like I had a low fever,
Mm-hmm.
and I had like a headache the first day,
Mm-hmm.
and I went and got I made an appointment to get tested, and then before the appointment, I lost my sense of taste,
Oh man.
and
And
that's when I knew. I was
something's
like,
happening.
ooh.
So
Yeah.
you made the appointment because you thought maybe you should get tested. It wasn't because you were required. You started feeling some symptoms.
Yeah, well, the thing is, at where I work at a lab,
Mhm.
since it's a lab, they're really super serious about all that stuff. So, like, right now, the way things are, if you feel sick, like, you can't go there.
Yeah.
And if you feel sick for, like, 2 days or whatever, you have to get tested. So, I felt sick, and I was like, all right, like, I have to get tested.
Mhm.
I didn't take it super seriously, but, again, like, I didn't really get very sick, but it just sucks because, I can't do anything.
So it's been 3 weeks, and you have your sense
Yeah.
of taste back now? Are you feeling better?
Yeah, yeah. The taste thing, it was like maybe 10 days,
Hmm.
maybe even more like a week. I don't quite remember.
So you didn't
And
Mhm.
I feel fine.
You didn't get really sick like some people have.
Yeah, no.
Oh man, it's a weird thing. And I
Mhm.
mean, what do you think about all the conspiracy theories regarding that?
Yeah,
It's a-
yeah. I mean, it's a bioweapon, man.
Nah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, the crazy part has been just how some people have had crazy reactions to it, and some people like you, yeah. I know a guy that was like 4 days and he was fine, maybe a week, but he said he just like you almost. It was just like random, just in case kind of test, and tested positive, but it was like fine with it. Well, shit,
Yeah.
man. Are you doing anything? Are you, taking your Greek roots and doing some like hot soup and drinking bone broth? Have you been doing anything specific for it?
No, I have been like making sure to like those B vitamin things that I made, like my little homemade vitamins. Like I've been taking more of that than I normally would and stuff like that. I think. Oh, also I've been eating oysters, like just a lot of oysters out of the can
Zinc?
because I heard the zinc. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just like, just have some zinc lying around. Might as well.
And you never know. It's so hard to find good information now, And somewhere I read that there is less zinc in canned. I mean, I'm sure there's still some in there, but just again, like personal experience, I always seem to just. I don't know if it's a placebo or in my head, but the fresh ones, if you can find them like at Whole Foods, you just fucking pop them open.
Yeah.
Always just.
Yeah, same thing. I love eating fresh oysters.
Yeah,
It's
they just something about it. I just feel it more, whatever it is. It's probably the chi going into my chakra, but I don't know.
it's the power of the ocean. It's like,
Yeah, I don't know.
Side is like giving you his energy.
And why B vitamin specifically? Why aren't you, vitamin D? You're in Florida, so you're not worried about that at all. Do you ever supplement vitamin D?
I have a little bottle of Thorne liquid vitamin D. I don't really use it. I figure I'm kind of skeptical of vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
Like people taking a lot of it. I don't know. It's probably best to get it from the sun. And I guess if you live in a northern climate, then it would make sense.
Yeah.
And like I said, I take vitamin K. That's also, I have the Thorne brand.
Mm-hmm.
And B vitamins, I wanted to experiment with those because you can't really overdose.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for them to be toxic because you just pee them out,
So that's why maybe Ray Peat recommends that liter of OJ a day, right? That's what he says. I don't know.
Yeah, well, how much? So it's 2 liters of milk in a liter.
It's a lot of fucking liquids, eh? I know, man. But speaking of liquids, I mean, what about water? I mean, because I don't know if you read that article he has. It's probably been a long time since you have, where he talks about, probably the whole 8 glasses of water a day is super, stupid. Could be toxic.
Yeah. So I think, like, I've gone back and forth on this stuff. Like, you're told to drink as much water as you can, and then you read Ray Peat, and he's like, "Don't drink any water."
Yeah.
So I just drink water when I feel like I want to drink water. Like I can't worry about all this stuff.
That doesn't make sense, Kyle. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, you need to worry about your everything.
I mean, I've tried like, I love milk. I don't know if it's my Russian genes or whatever, but I generally, like, I never had a problem drinking a lot of milk. I mean, I never drink a gallon, but if you told me to drink a gallon, I could easily pound that. But, like, I've tried the 2 liters and 1 liter of OJ. I mean, I definitely don't crave any water, like, whatsoever. And there's, and I've got that from, like, you mentioned Men Stone much earlier. It was like, he talked about how you probably don't want to have your pee clear all the time. Whereas if, again, you talk to, like, the typical fitness personality or, Joe Rogan, it's like, you should drink 15 gallons of water and then get an IV of water, and you should just be always, you should have a water bed. I mean, it's like, it's crazy how, I definitely don't think that's healthy. I mean, because I feel like you're peeing out a lot of your electrolytes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, probably just drinking to thirst, is a good idea there. And coffee.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Yeah. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Coffee, and I've gone back and forth with coffee. That's been one for me that I've gone back and forth with. It's like, I love coffee. I love the taste of it. I can drink a shitload. But then once I stopped drinking it, the detox period was a motherfucker. I mean, that was pretty bad. But then coming back to drinking it, I was so sensitive to it. Like, a half of a cup would just wind me up so much that I was like, I need to break walls. Like, it was crazy. So, but, just thinking about it, I'm just like, I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, or it could be just being sensitive to it, and then over time you become less sensitive to it. But as far as the Ray Peat perspective, it's very healthy. But then there's the other perspective. I can't remember the doctor. He wrote a book about DHEA. He was one of those guys that promoted it, like one of the first ones to, like, become mainstream. He made like a DHEA one. He talks about caffeine being super toxic and not good for your brain. I don't know. I can look it up.
But when you say DHEA, do you mean the steroid or the
prescription? Well, yeah.
The fatty acid.
The DHEA, you can go to Whole Foods and buy like a, whatever, 25 milligram thing of DHEA. I think it's...
that's dihydroepiandrosterone.
Yes, that word.
Yeah. Okay. Caffeine, coffee and the caffeine inside of it, I think it's stood the test of time. So I don't think it's very dangerous. Just like, anything else like tea and stuff. And yeah, I think if people have bad reactions to it, like some people, actually with the 23andMe, I analyzed my caffeine metabolizing genes. And I have the genes to quickly metabolize caffeine. So I can usually drink coffee at night, like, dinner time and stuff, and even later, and still sleep.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't, though. Like, if I'm actually kind of stressed out, I've noticed this. Like, it's really rare, but there are a few times that I drank coffee late at night, like 11 o'clock or even like midnight. And most nights I can actually do that and fall asleep, but occasionally I'll do it and I'll go to sleep, and for whatever reason, it keeps me up. And I can tell, because like I can kind of feel like my heart, sometimes you can feel like stress like in your chest and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think people should just, I think probably some people metabolize caffeine better. And, if you feel good on coffee, then you should drink it. And if it's...
but as far as the research...
funny story.
Yeah. Tell me.
I used to drink a bunch of Coke when I was like 12.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like super addicted to it. And I don't even remember why. But this was the first health food thing I ever did.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching this old TV show called is it The Odd Couple? It was like it was on Nick at Night, and it was one of these shows from like the 60s, and it was these two guys that were living together who were childhood friends, but then they were totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was like a man's man, and he smoked cigars and like ate junk food, and the other one was like a health nut.
Okay.
And the health nut guy sent the other guy to like a fat camp.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got to the fat camp, he like smuggled in food. Like under his bed, he had like sandwiches of like whatever. And I remember I was like 12 and I had a can of soda, and I was like, oh my God, that's like me with the soda. Like I would do that. And so I went cold turkey because I was like, I don't want to be like addicted to junk food.
No,
And it was around 4th of July because my family always has this big 4th of July party. And I remember that year I had a blistering headache all day long because my little 12-year-old body was like going through caffeine withdrawal.
Addicted.
And I didn't like understand.
Oh, man. So, yeah, because, more to say like what about the research on caffeine? The PD perspective is that, it extends life and it's good for you, blah, blah, blah. Have you read some of the literature on the caffeine stuff?
I haven't delved too deep into it. From what I understand, Ray basically has the position that it's like a chemical analog to thyroid hormone in the way that it activates cells, which seems to be sort of correct in the sense that like thyroid hormone too will, because caffeine, when you take it can kind of increase cortisol, especially if you take it without food.
Yeah.
Like if you just drink black coffee on an empty stomach. But thyroid will do the same thing. If you don't have energy in the system, like if you're like, say, hypoglycemic or something, and you take thyroid hormone, that will increase your cortisol. So they do sort of have the same effect profile, but I haven't looked at literature about caffeine itself.
Yeah, I think I've heard him say somewhere that he thinks of it more as a vitamin. Yeah, but I don't know the endless, because it's so variable how some people love it and some people just feel like shit on it. But then again, it's another one of those things like with the meat. What kind of meat? It's like what kind of coffee? I mean, you're drinking coffee black, and like you said, how much and what's the amount that you're drinking and what time and all those sort of things. So it's probably worth playing around with. And I mean, we're late in the conversation, but like maybe we can finish up just briefly, even though there's a big world of like, because you mentioned your genetic testing, and I've done that too, and I've done even like some consultations with some docs. I mean, how, and then you have other doctors who are sort of saying it's not bullshit, but for example, to prescribe somebody a diet, based on their genetic profile at this point, it's not quite it's not quite valid yet. I mean, we're not at that level of understanding genes. I mean, how much do you think your genes, affect you? Like, I mean, in the long run, I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think if we, like you said, I think there will be a point where it'll probably be pretty explanatory of a lot of things. Like, somebody will be able to know why they react differently to a food than somebody else, but there's always room for like non-genetic causes as well. Like if you like if there's two twins, like something different could happen, and they could have like a different sort of environmental effect that would change the way their metabolism works or whatever. That's possible.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's good. I mean, it's just a tool, like, and people probably overuse it. I guess I would go with the things that are like more well documented, like the caffeine metabolizing genes. Like that's pretty well known, like how that works. and you can like verify it yourself, like you can, like I've met other people that looked at their 23andMe and looked at the caffeine thing, and it was like consistent with their experience.
Yeah.
Of how how fast they metabolize caffeine. So for that stuff, I think it's great. But yeah, the thing is, it's like I think an industry is going to pop up around things like that, where it's like a fad, like, oh yeah, like I've gotten ads for this actually, like on Facebook, where it's like, oh, give us $60 or something.
Yeah. Like, the popular docs of, like, have you heard of Dr. Rhonda Patrick? No. Yeah, she's been on, like, Rogan's podcast. I've done her. It's, like, very cheap, though. I mean, it's, like, but there's companies that do it for thousands of dollars. I mean, all kinds of, where it's just, you just type in your, S&P code or whatever, and you get that, result of, like, here's the important genes. But the problem with that, like you said, is, like, for example, I did Rhonda Patrick's, and one of the things that was, like, at the very top, she sort of lists them as, like, things that she thinks are important to least important, and things. She had one gene being important, and the description said you probably should be eating more PUFA, polyunsaturated fats, and that was like one thing where I was like, well, okay. I mean, it's not like she's not lying, but like right? It's like, where are we at with the science? With basic things like that. Even, I mean, if you go American Heart Association, they have the corn oil labeled as heart healthy.
Right.
I mean, where are they pulling these studies from? And man, so it's a bit confusing for the average person. So I don't know. So I try not to take it too seriously. At first I did. I looked at it and I was like, oh man. But yeah.
Well, yeah, the data that they're pulling from, like, it has a perspective. So if the overall perspective of the mainstream is that, like, X is healthy, but you disagree with the mainstream on that, those services are going to give you that mainstream information most likely, unless it's somebody like, I guess some alternative health person could write their own thing, like for those different genes, like where, say, they don't think PUFA is healthy, like they could have an entirely different interpretation of how to recommend a diet for this profile, this genetic profile. But that might be like a ton of work. I don't really know exactly how those things work.
Yeah, that's where people get tripped up. I mean, if you had a friend, I mean, what would you recommend? I mean, how does one go about figuring out this endless world of, because most people, they don't really give a fuck. They don't want to, talk about PUFA oxidation and all that stuff. They really just want to be healthy. But I'm finding more and more these days, it's like, it's just harder just to have some advice, to give somebody some simple advice, because, you can tell them be keto or you can tell them be vegan, and it's like, it'll only take them so far. I mean, how would you guide somebody to getting, researching and looking through the, the stuff that never ends?
Yeah, well, that's why vegan and keto is so popular, because you can spread it, because it's an idea. It's like a coherent message that you can give to somebody, and it has, like, instructions embedded within it. Like, you can be vegan. People understand what that means.
Yeah.
Like, you can't make a single word answer or like a slogan for, say like the Ray Peat diet or whatever. Like, people can say that, but that doesn't really mean anything.
Right. Well, to the people that have been, looked at it deeply enough, it does. I mean, to other people, it's just like, drink milk, orange juice, and Mexicola. You're good, And, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that have had different experiences in that world for a while, and they've, like, modified stuff a lot for themselves. So, I mean, if I was giving somebody who had no idea about anything advice, like, I think the easiest thing to do is to try to make as much food as you can, like, at home, like, do home cooking, try to eat, like, sort of traditional foods, and not necessarily in the paleo sense, like from 10,000 years ago, but just
real,
like 200 years ago. Yeah, like, because that stuff, like I said, like, it kind of stands the test of time. Like, if everybody from, like, you're from Russia, like, if everybody for the last 500 years ate a certain dish, like, it's probably not going to kill you. So, starting there.
Except meat. That'll kill you.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Starting there and then just sort of being like, does this feel good? Or like, add a little bit more protein, like try 150 grams of protein and then try different things. Like, yeah, if you want to actually figure that stuff out, you do kind of have to do some experimentation. And yeah, if people just want to do like keto and then think it's going to solve all their problems.
Right. Which is why I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to fall into these camps and follow those ideologies, because I've done it myself and you have too. Mm-hmm. And I think the good thing that as long as, again, the secret is to like not get attached to it, because if you're attached to it, that's how you end up being that fucking, what's that famous vegan doctor that was on all over YouTube with a 6-pack, vegan for life, and now he's eating organ meats because he says he ruined his gut biome, blah blah blah. And there's a lot of people like that. Yeah, but I think the good thing, about doing those sort of diets is that at least, really, what's important is like to like pay attention to what's happening to you. If you notice that, you're farting all the time when you're eating beans and all that kinds of stuff. Maybe shouldn't be happening. It's if you're losing your period, maybe shouldn't be happening. Or if you're just straight up eating meat but you feel like dog shit all the time. So I think at least that's I think I'm all for people experimenting. People definitely just want to kind of get religious about it and get attached to one ideology. Yeah, man.
Yeah, because it's hard. It's hard to like it. It's hard to not eat things that aren't like on your diet, and I think having faith in a diet is one of the few things that gives the average person the willpower to like stay on something.
Yeah, which is not bad, but it's just it sucks when you get too attached to it, and it's that's the tough part. And you have to. That's why I always just tell people, try being vegan. I've done it. Try being vegetarian. Try doing that. Yeah. Well, man, it's been great. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time, man.
Yeah, it was fun. It's a good conversation.
Sweet, man. Yeah, we should come back and do it again sometime. I appreciate it, man. I hope you feel better.
Yeah, like I said, I feel fine. I just want to like be able to get back to like social life, and like being able to. Are
you isolated legit at home? Are you just quarantined up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go and grab something at the store and like put a mask on and just get in and get out, but like I can't like hang out with people,
Yeah, and when can you get tested again and see if you're clear?
I just did. I guess yesterday. The first time I got tested was through my university, and it was like real good, and I got the results fast. And then I tried to get a retest, and something happened with their system. But like it's just crazy, and I couldn't get an appointment. So eventually, I was just like, I can't stand this anymore. So I just Googled like COVID-19 testing sites in my county and drove up to a place. I had to sit in my car for like 2 hours. It's like a drive-through thing, and there's like 20 cars. And so anyway, I got tested. So like sometime next week, I should probably get my results.
All right, man. We'll fingers crossed. Well, you'll be all right. Well, at least you're feeling better. That's the most important. That means you'll be fine. Okay, brother. Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time. And your YouTube is, once again, it's say it again.
Nutricrinology. Nutricrinology.
And you don't have like a website out or anything like that right now? Not yet, yeah?
No, I used to, but I got rid of it. I'll bring it back eventually. It'll be the same thing. It'll be nutricrinology.com.
Yeah, just anything else, something else people should check out. Anything you have published out there?
I have another I think YouTube channel with a friend. Yeah, I don't think it's a podcast feed, but Nutrition Deconstructed, 2 words.
Sweet. Okay. Yeah, and that on your YouTube channel, I love that. I send that out to a bunch of people, that alien epidemiology video. It's pretty good, so check it out if you're interested. Thanks again, man. Take care. Feel better.
All right, thanks.
See ya, man. Have a good one.